this event. Now, the program this morning is divided into 3 segments. So we will begin with topics on research integrity in general, and then we go on to topics specifically about plagiarism. And this will be about plagiarism in both the academe and in the research publication world. No? And lastly, we will have a panel discussion, interesting cases, so we can discuss in more detail the nuances of plagiarism. Okay, so Rufus?
Right, thank you, sir. But before we start, please be reminded of the following session norms. First, make sure that you turn off your mic throughout the program to avoid disturbance. Mics can only be unmuted during acknowledgement and time for your talk. Second, this session will be recorded and will be broadcasted live via the UP Manila official Facebook page. So for those who are not going to be able to enter the webinar room later on, you may join us via the Facebook Live. We are currently at 1,300, so 1,300, and people are still coming in, so we hope to get populated later on. Third, feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box or reserve them during the open forum and we will read it for you. And lastly, let us keep this environment respectful and professional at all times. Okay, so I think we're now ready to begin with let me call on our first speaker. Before we start, we would like to call on the Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Manila, Dr. Carmencita Padilla, to give her welcome remarks. Ma'am?
Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Cynthia Banzon Bautista, Vice Chancellor for Research, Dr. Armand Crisostomo, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Dr. Nimia Simbulan, Vice Chancellor for Administration, Dr. Aline Samaniego, Dr. Daniel Barr, Principal Research Integrity Advisor of the Melbourne Institute of Technology, UP Manila Deans and Directors, researchers, guests, good morning. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar that tackles very important and pressing issues, research integrity and plagiarism. UP Manila is committed to creating an environment that will encourage its community of researchers, faculty, students, and reps to do more research, more relevant research, and trustworthy research. And in support of our researchers in UP Manila, we have the Research Ethics Board and the Research Grants Administration Office. The bottom line is the cultivation of a research environment governed by the principles of incorruptibility, ethics, and responsibility. UP Manila is committed to pursue active adherence to the ethical principles and professional standards essential for the responsible practice of research. Now, in 2019, an administrative order was issued creating the UP Manila Committee on Research Integrity to institutionalize the promotion of and uphold the role of responsible and ethical conduct of study. But what prompted this issuance? This issuance was prompted by events in the past 6 years during my term as a chancellor. In our collaborations with universities overseas, our researchers were asked on the existence of an Office for Research Integrity or a corresponding structure to manage research conduct issues. And then in 2019, UP Manila sent Dr. Edward Wang to attend the World Conference on Research Integrity in Hong Kong to learn more from our colleagues in other universities on the mechanics of setting up the office. Now, this 2019 conference validated our premise that the research university, and that is the University of the Philippines in our case, needed a formal structure for awareness, education, and monitoring of research conduct among its constituents, especially the students who will become active researchers after their graduation. So soon after his return, the UP Manila Committee on Research Integrity was created. Now, I thank the Committee on Research Integrity chaired by Dr. Wang and his members, Dr. Jojo Mantaring, Dr. Jean Toral, Dr. Cathy Reyes, and Dr. Marilyn Balolong for taking on the responsibility of raising awareness of the UP Manila community on the proper and truthful research conduct. Although focused mainly on education, it will also be the monitoring arm of the university when it becomes an office. Now, prior to the lockdown, the committee was conducting a series of workshops to raise awareness in the UP Manila community. I mean, people talk about truthfulness, people talk about ethical research, but research integrity beyond the approval by the Research Ethics Board is really another issue. And I thank the committee for doing the roadshow prior to the lockdown. And Dr. Wang will tell you more on the various activities that they've been doing since its inception in 2019. Now, while waiting for the office to be created, so we just have a committee right now, I commend the committee for working on the UP Manila's Code for Responsible Conduct of Research, meant to be a sort of a Bible for us researchers, a guidance. And this was launched last November 2020 during the Science and Technology Week, where the committee hosted a webinar for senior management and researchers. My administration is looking forward to this committee becoming an office with bigger responsibilities in the next 12 months. Allow me also to thank the support of the University of the Philippines system through the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Cynthia Bautista, who has provided the guidance in setting up this future office. And now, as part of the committee's continuing commitment, we are attending this webinar. We are optimistic that this webinar will address research integrity in general and plagiarism in the arenas of both scientific publication and the academe. I exhort everyone in our UP Manila community to value integrity in our character and let it also permeate all our works and be manifested in our research activities. So thank you again to the committee, and thank you for thousands of our participants, both here in the Zoom and the Facebook Live. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat at mabuhay. Back to you, Rufus.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you for inspiring, and then thank you for inspiring us and for those encouraging words, and for walking us down memory lane, reminiscing our journey, and more importantly, for highlighting the relevance of our topic for this morning. Okay, so now we'll go straight to the first lecture to give us an introduction and background on the Committee on Research Integrity. May I call on the chair of the UP Manila Committee on Research Integrity, and at the same time a professor of orthopedics at the UP College of Medicine, Dr. Edward Wang. Sir?
Thank you, Rufus. Thank you, Chancellor. And good morning to everyone. Do you all see my slides already?
Yes, sir.
Hold on 1 minute. I'm not sure why it's not working. Let's see, share screen again. Okay, is that better?
Yes, sir. We can see it now.
Okay, you can see the change? Okay, right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, allow me to start off this morning with this one sample case. Sometime in 1998, an earth-shaking article was published in the prestigious medical journal, everyone knows it, The Lancet, raising the possibility of a link between a new form of bowel disease, autism, and the vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella, otherwise known as the MMR vaccine. Now, the instant publicity and controversy, including a press conference by the author, would eventually contribute, many believe, to a sharp decline in vaccinations. But not only were other researchers unable to duplicate the claims made by this study, the UK General Medical Council discovered also that the author, Andrew Wakefield, had been dishonest in his claims and had even mistreated some study patients. There were undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, with some of the parents of the children in the study having been recruited through a lawyer preparing a lawsuit against MMR manufacturers. So Dr. Wakefield was stripped of his medical license And the Lancet eventually retracted the article, but much damage had already been done, including possibly measles outbreaks and a negative perception against vaccinations, the effects of which we continue to see today. Now, this powerful example introduces to you the concept of research integrity and how research misconduct can have far-reaching consequences, probably better thought of as a ripple effect, affecting not just the authors or the violators and the institution's prestige, but more importantly, hurting society, hurting us, hurting everyone in general, and sometimes tragically affecting human lives. So, how do we define research misconduct or the violations of research integrity? We make a distinction first between research ethics and research misconduct. So, research ethics protects study subjects, be they human or animal. Research integrity, on the other hand, makes sure that there is a responsible conduct of research. And the cardinal sins of research misconduct are traditionally defined as fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. And these are some examples of the so-called lesser violations of research integrity. So what's all of this got to do with us? Maybe these stories of misconduct happen in other countries, and maybe it's hyped up by media. They can never happen to us. But that's why never say never, because it can happen to any one of us. I'm quite sure that all of us here are attached to some institution of higher learning, whether it is a private or state-run university or college, or to an agency which deals with the production and dissemination of knowledge. We are all in some of the top courses of our schools, and we are all exceptional in the work we do. But it is precisely in many of these agencies, institutions, schools, and universities where we study or work, where the research organization and infrastructure has grown tremendously in the past decade, with increases in researchers, researches, collaborations, funding, where suddenly everyone is aware of student awards, faculty promotions, and where there's an increasing pressure now to produce the best thesis or publish the best article. And that's when the issues of research integrity can begin to surface even more. So according to Professor Gonzalez, I like to quote his article, all of us, without exception, are subject to what he calls the tragedies or the 9 pitfalls of research misconduct, mainly temptation, rationalization, ambition, group and authority pressure, entitlement, deception, incrementalism, embarrassment, and stupid systems. As you all heard the Chancellor say in her welcome remarks, more and more we at the UP Manila needed an Office of Research Integrity. And this was not just because we were doing more collaborative work, but also because the research machine was rapidly growing within the university. So in 2019, I was given the opportunity to attend the 6th World Conference on Research Integrity in Hong Kong, where I had the honor to meet one of our guest speakers today, Dr. Daniel Barr. And upon return home, we began to hold educational conferences about research integrity, even as a committee on research integrity was formed with an administrative order from the Chancellor's office. So we went through several workshops and we initiated a research on research integrity. And by the end of 2020, we were able to launch a UP Manila code for the responsible conduct of research. The code contains a preamble, principles, and responsibilities of both hospital and research, and the researcher, not different from codes anywhere else in the whole world. So you will see that the committee has, for its objective, the maintenance of a healthy research environment by establishing a culture of responsible research. And how do we aim to do this? Via our 2 equally important functions, education and monitoring. And this is the reason why we continue on what we call an education caravan on research integrity. For 2021, today is the first of a quarterly set of webinars. So today we have what one might call a dream team of speakers. And after their lectures, we will also have a series of case discussions so that we can better understand what the concept of research integrity and the concept of plagiarism. So before I finish, allow me to share a cartoon which I have modified a little bit. I'm afraid there's a big difference between Doctors Without Borders, referring of course to the famous Medicine Sans Frontiers, and Doctors Without Boundaries. So we hope that together with all of you and with the input from all of our esteemed speakers, the Committee on Research Integrity can better carry out this objective for all of us, defining boundaries as we explore frontiers. So thank you, good morning, and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you, Rufus.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang. Thank you, sir, for that very brief yet concise lecture and for setting the tone for this event. So as previously said, we have a packed program this morning. So we shall now go ahead and move to the next part of our program on responsible conduct of research. So we will be having 2 lectures in this part of the program. So, sir, we shall now introduce our first speaker.
Okay, allow me to introduce my very good friend, Dr. Jacinto Blas Mantaring III. He is a professor of clinical epidemiology and the chair of that department. He is also clinical professor of pediatrics, a practicing neonatologist, and an attending physician at the Philippine General Hospital. He chairs the University of the Philippines Research Ethics Board and the Department of Health Single Joint Research Ethics Board. I know he is also president of the Philippine Health Research Ethics Network, or PHREN, the FRIEND. So, Dr. Mantaring, the floor is yours. You're muted, Jojo.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wang, for that kind introduction. And actually, thank you also for providing the context by which this seminar has been organized and how it how it's going to be playing out. So I'd like to first show you my disclosures. Actually, my involvement in the Committee of Research Integrity is very young. I'm as young as the committee. No, I mean, my involvement is as young as the committee. It's barely 2 years old. My background is in clinical epidemiology and research ethics. I cannot claim to be an expert in research integrity. And each seminar, workshop, and now this webinar is a learning experience for me. So these are my disclosures. And these are the objectives of this lecture. So my role is to provide an overview of research integrity and situate one of the most common forms of research misconduct, which is plagiarism, in the context of research integrity. The objectives of this lecture are to discuss research integrity, differentiated from research ethics, to discuss the principles of responsible conduct of research, to define research misconduct, specifically fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, and discuss the prevalence of plagiarism. Excuse. And this is the outline of my talk. So let's start off with a few definitions. Research in standards essential for the responsible practice of research. In the scientific community, the adoption of principles and practices of research integrity is being promoted more simply accept impositions with the administration. And this is not unlike the vision of the Committee of Research or to address the issue, the research integrity to promote responsible conduct of research. Research ethics is it's the application of moral rules and publication of forming moral rules the rights of benefits of research are made this research
Rufus, can you hear me?
Hi, sir. Yes, I can hear you po. Sir,
Yeah,
I think
something wrong.
we lost si Sir Jojo.
Yeah. I
Okay.
wonder if
While we wait for him to come back here in the webinar, we would like to acknowledge first our participants. We are at 1.8 thousand right now. So we have 1,800 joining us live here at Zoom, while we are at around 200 participants via the Facebook Live. So we'll just try to connect back Dr. Mantari.
so. Just in case he cannot immediately, Dan,
Mhm.
would it be possible for you to go ahead with your lecture?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, Rufus, let's do that, and then
Right. Okay, sir. So do you want to go ahead, sir, and introduce our next speaker, sir?
Okay. Sorry, everyone. So we're going to have our second speaker come in first. Jojo.
Am I back?
Yeah, we
sorry, there
lost
was,
you for we lost you for actually your entire first half.
yeah, there was a
Yeah, Jojo will have Dr.
there was
Barr
a
go ahead.
momentary power outage.
Jojo, we'll have Dr. Barr go ahead na lang until your internet
Okay.
is more stable. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Jojo. Okay. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Daniel Barr. Dr. Barr, or Daniel Barr. Dan is the Principal Research Integrity Advisor at RMIT University. This is the Melbourne Institute of Technology. Dan is an experienced research manager specializing in how institutions enable research integrity. And he also conducts research into research integrity. He is a training fellow of the Australasian Research Management Society and an honorary senior fellow at the University of Melbourne. Dan was co-chair of the 6th World Conference on Research Integrity held in Hong Kong in 2019, and was also co-chair of the 5th meeting of the Asia-Pacific Research Integrity Network, held virtually via Seoul in 2021. He currently serves on the governing board of the World Conferences on Research Integrity Foundation. So, good morning, Dan. The floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Dr. Wang, for your very kind invitation to join this amazing initiative. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. I'll just double check with everyone that you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Right, the thousands of you. What an amazing turnout. So congratulations firstly on that. Thank you very much again for the invitation. And today I would like to speak to you about the importance of research integrity during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to begin, as is our custom, with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the country on which I'm calling in from today, the country of the Bunurong and Woiwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation here in Victoria. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I would like to extend my acknowledgement and my respects to the traditional custodians on the lands and waters in which we're meeting today, and places in which we feel a particular connection to, in which we work, live and dream. I'd also like to acknowledge a co-author. There are a number of acknowledgements throughout the talk today, and as I acknowledge my co-author, Dr. Paul Taylor, who sadly unexpectedly passed away at the end of 2018. And Paul was a leading figure in research integrity internationally and a great friend as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the challenging and interesting times in which we're meeting. It has accelerated various things. A wonderful thing is that we're able to meet today with you, and the other things, particularly around the COVID-19 pandemic, have changed are in the research environment, and it's changed the environment potentially not only just now but also into the future. The outline of my talk today, my presentation, is here. I'd like to speak with you about the work we've done for the Apec, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, around guiding principles for research integrity. I'd also like then to talk to you about research integrity during the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, briefly around ways to support research integrity at institutions. Very much similar to the beginning of the previous speaker's wonderful presentation, I'd like to start with some basics, and this is around just setting the scene for a general introduction. Research generates and organises knowledge by the systematic investigation and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts, arguments, and to reach new conclusions. We do this because largely people are really interested in making a positive impact and to better understand the world in which we live and how we live it. All research has impact. We do research because we don't know the answers, and there's always an impact in research. The research impact that occurs is highly unpredictable. It can be positive. In fact, most of us aim for positive research impact, the positive changes that can come from research. But we don't really know always what the impacts will be, and sometimes the impacts are negative, much like Dr. Wang's introduction around the negative research impact that occurred through the publication of falsified or flawed research. And because of this unpredictable nature of research, we need to be able to trust it. And that trust is generated through upholding the principles of research integrity. So the principles of research integrity make research trustworthy, and they also inform its excellence. Prior to the pandemic, we sort of already knew or had some good ideas around why research integrity was important. As I just mentioned, research integrity makes research trustworthy, but also we're starting to better understand now that research integrity is actually the foundation for high quality research, reproducible research with great positive impacts. Research integrity also allows us to recognise and address breaches, or as has been introduced already, violations or research misconduct. Better understanding research integrity overall allows us to address essentially the full spectrum of research, variation in the research practice. As I mentioned, it ensures positive impact of research, and it also, research integrity enables public trust and social licence, particularly in universities. There's a nice overlap with our presentations here. I think, and I'm looking forward to the next presentation, here's a definition of research integrity that's highly similar to the previous one. Research integrity is around this coherent and consistent adherence or sticking to a set of principles that are characteristic of trustworthy, ethical, and responsible research. So the idea that you stick to the high level and that translate these principles into your practices throughout all the different ways in how research can be generated, conducted, reported on. So this definition calls out principles. What are the principles then? The new Manila Code of Conduct is based around principles, as are now many codes or policies for research integrity, for trustworthy research. As I mentioned earlier, we undertook research for Apec to develop a set of guiding principles for research integrity. The motivation for doing this work was around better enabling collaboration and research mobility, not only just trust, but also enabling this sort of research throughout Asia Pacific. And through our research and consultations, we found that there were 7 guiding principles for research integrity. These are honesty, responsibility, rigour, transparency, respect, fairness, and diversity. Some of these may appear very familiar to you, and some of these will feel intrinsic, and some others might need a bit more interpretation. We've defined these principles using the Oxford English Dictionary as our base to provide essentially really clear advice or clear expectations of the boundaries that we might have or might expect to have as we explore the frontier in research and in knowledge, ways of knowing. For example, honesty is defined as being truthful and free of deceit in research. Very sort of basic or essential definition. You'll see here the guiding principle of responsibility covers a large number, essentially, of activities around accountability, around fulfilling duties, around compliance. But then there are the others: rigour, transparency, respect, and fairness. And fairness was something that and fairness and diversity. And diversity was a guiding principle that really came out of our interactions across the Asia Pacific and a willingness to be involved in the creation of these from contributors from across different economies. We've used the principles to form the basis or foundation for a variety of responsibilities or things that we should be doing or must do for researchers, so us researchers, whether we're student researchers or well-established researchers, for institutions such as universities, and also for funders and sponsors. We've generated essentially an understanding through this work that there are shared responsibilities for all of us in the research endeavour, at least for researchers, institutions and funders or sponsors of research. These include the need to adhere to the guiding principles, to reflect on how the guiding principles apply in our work, whether it's in our administration work or whether we're conducting research. And also the idea that we all need to come together to support a culture of trustworthy and responsible research, to really promote and foster what really is an essential intrinsic part of research. So we do provide guiding principles. We do provide then these shared responsibilities that still appear fairly high level, aspirational, strengths-based. But we also provide details in this document. And we see these as the things that researchers or institutions or funders and sponsors of research that they will do for responsible and trustworthy research. We've provided these in terms of the translation of the principles into practices, and whether that's conduct or administration. And you can see here then transparency then informs how researchers avoid breaches or make clear records or communicate their research findings in a very, very open way where that's possible, but also how institutions should be contributing to the culture of research or the environment, providing frameworks for the disclosure of conflicts of interest. Very, very similar responsibilities overall then for funders. So that's a snapshot of the principles of the foundation of research integrity according to that definition, according to our discussion today, that could apply and are intended to apply across the Asia Pacific region for members of Apec and potentially elsewhere. And now we get to talk about then, what about now? What about since early 2020 when the world significantly changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic? We need to acknowledge that there are changed environments, and now we have some really interesting aspects, the changes to research. And this is some lovely work. I apologise, this slide is very busy. It's based on a wonderful research-based infographic prepared by Holly Else in Nature that's looked at particularly the effects of the pandemic on the research publication space. So the first graph, this large curve or set of lines that are showing essentially an explosion in research items, communication items about COVID-19 and the pandemic. And these aren't just in epidemiology, public health or virology, they're across a range of disciplines. And there's this explosion or big bang of research, public communication, it is showing you that there's just a huge amount of activity now, research activity and communication into the pandemic. And this reflects quite a change in activity. The middle graph there shows then ways in which researchers have decided to communicate their research rapidly in the context of the pandemic is using preprint platforms that don't have traditional peer review. So this is very interesting. The COVID-19 pandemic appears to have already accelerated certain aspects of research practices, and one of them was the use of preprint servers. And an example here is medRxiv, but there are many others that shows in the blue lines an explosion of preprint research items, let's call them manuscripts or publications, but they're preprints, that exist then and can be used in this context, but don't have traditional peer review. It's very interesting. And finally, the bar graph that I've turned upside, looking at submissions of publications. And essentially what you're looking at there for each pair of bar columns is female, male, so gendered. And so what we see across different career stages, across disciplines, there's been a lot of submissions, a lot more submissions from men as compared to women. And this gendered aspect of research is also important to acknowledge. It's important to acknowledge for us as a community, for female researchers and academics and their obligations of what they've been doing and how they do research during the pandemic, but also acknowledging there's some evidence that research integrity is gendered, in that typically men are the ones who are found to have seriously breached the principles of research integrity. If you look at the documents and the information that we have, it's typically men who conduct research in ways that breach trustworthiness. So this is quite important. So we had a number of questions then around what has changed for research integrity during the pandemic. These are quite basic. Have the principles, are they still relevant? How are they unchanged? How has research changed? What are the challenges for ensuring integrity? How do we go about better understanding this quickly and then on into the future? And can we play, through research integrity, a greater role in public trust, for example, in vaccinations? And what are the demonstrations of this building of public trust or trust in research with end users? We didn't really have the answers, so we asked. We asked a number of people, and we have a large network of research integrity advisors at RMIT, the university where I work. We've asked them. We asked for experts across research management, graduate research, or PhD candidature, experts in research data, and also internationally recognised experts in research integrity, and I acknowledge all their contributions here. We interviewed a number of them and we asked them simply what are the challenges for research integrity during the pandemic, and there were a number of aspects and impressions that were given to us. The principles of research integrity were unchanged, but there was need for more guidance. There were huge communication challenges that were introduced due to physical distancing and remote working, particularly for supervisory teams and for relationships and spontaneous interactions. There were concerns that the rush to produce research, particularly about COVID-19 and the pandemic, might then have research ethics and integrity seen as being extra, and not so necessary or nice to have. There's an aspect in social sciences about over-enthusiastic rush to write things or not think about research in a normally slower pace, and that might affect the rigour of research. An increased need for openness and transparency, and how do we do that while protecting the rights of individuals, research ethics, as well as intellectual property. The idea that overall we're experiencing pressure as well as being unwell or as human beings. And then there's also the concern around politicisation of research, particularly from experts based in the United States. So we know then that there are induced changes to research due to the pandemic. This includes the need to conduct COVID-safe research to prevent infection, and this might mean physical distancing. That many of us have changed research directions, so how do we ensure that we have research ethics still apply to those changed directions? We need to ensure the integrity of COVID-19 research, as we do for all research, but this appears to have particular challenges due to the data that I showed earlier, this explosion of work, as well as other aspects. There was a need for rapid data management and sharing. So what are the practices that we had to amplify or introduce to help that? And we needed to support particularly remote supervision. What are the new ways and acknowledgements that we had to put in to support our PhD students and masters, the engine room of research, as they were learning to become great researchers. We really don't know yet exactly how the spectrum of research integrity has changed due to the pandemic. We hope that most of research fulfills the principles of research integrity, as I've discussed. Here are the Apec ones. But we know that there is a blurry line, a threshold, as you translate principles into practice. This results in breaches or serious breaches of research integrity. And this is just an example of some of them. But we know that some of the key ones, the ones we thought were really important before the pandemic, are probably really affected now. This includes inadequate supervision of students, the mismanagement of data, as well as flawed reporting and designs, as well as other aspects such as plagiarism. And then there's another aspect that's really dramatically changed, profoundly changed, and that's for our institutions and universities. compared to what we know about how researchers do research integrity, we know even less about how institutions do research integrity. And by that I mean we have some idea around the principles and practices we should be institutions should be doing to support and enable research integrity, just like we found in the Apec work. However, we really have a poor understanding of how well research institutions do this, as well as what are the mechanisms that affect them. But we know certainly that the pandemic has changed our environment, for institutions. So presumably there's been some massive changes here as well. At RMIT, to respond to the pandemic and support our researchers and integrity, we put in a number of guidance materials, tools, activities and initiatives, including ensuring researchers had a COVID-safe plan, allowing rapid amendments to existing ethics approvals, really amplifying the work we were doing to support research data management, which we still have concerns about, providing more information around how researchers could ensure rigour in their work, and having particular initiatives around supporting student researchers, graduate researchers, PhD students, including how they might change or pivot the research that they're doing to address the pandemic. Our current plans for this year continue on from this base, particularly around four things, I think. We have a network of research integrity advisors that I mentioned earlier. We train them, we provide them with support, ongoing education and initiatives. They're there to provide advice to all the research community at RMIT, and we're now trying to really amplify their activity, not only by promoting them to our community, but really getting them involved in things such as strategy in our education programs. Our education program is quite well set up as a basic program, we think. We're trying to look at ways in which we can really get into places where graduate researchers and early career researchers will really want to listen to us. And that includes having incursions or doing research integrity classes within existing courses, embedding those throughout all the disciplines and colleges at RMIT, hopefully. We're looking at the incentivisation and rewards for responsible research. That's some interesting work that came out of the Hong Kong conference in 2019. And we've also recently finished an independent review of our research integrity system at RMIT. We had a group of experts do that. We're always looking, I think, for how we can improve or ensure responsible research at RMIT. To summarise, research integrity underpins trustworthiness and positive impact of research. There are 7 principles for the Apec guiding principles for research integrity: honesty, responsibility, rigour, transparency, respect, fairness and diversity. With principles-based policies such as that, and such as the Code of Conduct at the University of Philippines, Manila, can provide meaning for research integrity, and they can actually be used for this sort of strengths-based improvement of research capabilities, programs such as education and training. The research integrity principles remain crucial to ensuring trust during the pandemic, which has changed the global research environment. We still know, we're starting to better understand how it's changed, but we still know probably very little. And how well institutions enable research integrity by researchers or how they do it is not well understood. And we should be always thinking about new ideas, trying them out and testing them, seeing whether they're effective. I'd like to thank very much all of you for listening, but also in particular the Chair and Committee on Research Integrity at the University, Dr. Wang. I'd like to make a note of his kind invitation. Thank you very much. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the significant contributions of the Apec work, and the parts of this presentation are presented elsewhere. And I'd also like to extend a warm and cordial invitation to all of you to the 7th World Conference on Research Integrity, currently scheduled for next year in Cape Town, but also a series of free webinars that we're hosting from the end of May. So please be involved with that. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barr, for that, for walking us through the research integrity and its guiding principles and relating it to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is really relevant today. So before we go back to the talk of Dr. Mantaring, I would just like to remind our attendees that if you have questions, please do not hesitate to type them in our Q&A box. That is there's a button down in your screens, and you can click that and type in your questions so we can read them during the open forum later on. So, and we would like to address also, there are many questions about certificates. Yes, e-certificates will be provided later. Uh, we will be putting here the link for the evaluation, which once you answer, an e-certificate will be sent directly to you. Okay, I think we're ready to go back to the talk of Dr. Mantaring, right?
Okay. Dr. Mantaring, are you okay?
I hope so.
You ready? Okay. Right. Okay. So here
Sorry
again we have
about that.
Professor Mantaring. Jojo.
And I'm at a loss as to where I got lost, or should I just start from the start?
I think you best start from
Yes.
from the very beginning.
So, okay, thank you again, Dr. Wang. And I'll just skip my disclosures. And I don't know if you reached the objectives of this talk,
Yes, we did.
but okay, so maybe I can skip that also. And the outline of my talk. You reached this part? Okay, good. Okay, so we can go straight to the definitions. Research integrity, and it's good that this has already been touched and by our speakers, is the active adherence to the ethical principles and professional standards essential for the responsible practice of research. And as I've said in the scientific community, the adoption of the principles and practices of research integrity is being promoted as a personal conviction. And as I've said also, that this is the vision of the Committee of Research Integrity for UP Manila, which means that we want to create an atmosphere of research integrity, of responsible conduct of research. As opposed to research ethics, which is defined as the application of moral rules and professional codes of conduct to the collection, analysis, reporting, and publication of information, research ethics concerns itself mainly with the protection of the rights and the welfare of the research participant, whereas research integrity protects the credibility of the research results, which should redound not only to the researcher and to the institution, but to the research participant as well. And therefore, it's really very difficult to separate research ethics from research integrity or research integrity from research ethics. But let it be clear that research ethics focuses on the protection of research participants. So the US National Academy of Science states that for individuals, research integrity is an aspect of moral character and experience, and it involves above all a commitment to intellectual honesty and personal responsibility, and to a range of practices that characterizes responsible research conduct. So what are these practices that characterizes responsible research conduct? These are, but not limited to, of course, honesty and fairness in proposing, performing, and reporting research, accuracy and fairness in representing contributions to the research proposals and reports, proficiency and fairness in peer review, collegiality in scientific interactions, communications, and sharing of resources, disclosures of conflicts of interest, protection of human subjects and humane care of animals, and adherence to the mutual responsibilities of mentors and trainees. In other words, research integrity is an integral part of the whole research process, from planning to conduct to dissemination. And it calls for professionalism in science. I don't think I need to expound on this. So thank you, Dr. Barr, for the elements of responsible conduct of research. But this slide I borrowed from Dr. Wang, which gives us a an analogy that can be appreciated by all. So in general terms, responsible conduct in research is simply good citizenship applied to professional life or professionalism in science. And the elements of professionalism in science, of course, include intellectual honesty, excellence in thinking and doing, collegiality and openness, autonomy, and responsibility, as well as self-regulation. I'd like to show this diagram that just to emphasize that there's a wide spectrum of how research is conducted. History shows us that integrity issues exist even in the most respectable institutions. It is assumed, or it was assumed, that investigators have a sincere desire to uplift and uphold and improve the lives of the people or the beneficiaries of the research. So in the responsible conduct of research, researches are expected to be relevant, responsible, and honest. So that is the ideal situation. On the other end of the spectrum is research misconduct. So this is irresponsible conduct of research. And research misconduct includes fraudulent research, maybe falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism. And in the middle is the gray area, which I would label as questionable research practices. It represents, I guess, sloppy science, which includes maybe cutting corners, taking shortcuts, honest errors, negligence, or lacking in diligence. And what differentiates questionable research practices from research misconduct is that for research misconduct, there is an intent to deceive. But of course, we would like to promote the ideal, which is the responsible conduct of research. So now let's go to the big three of scientific misconduct. And I don't think I need to expound on this because this has been tackled by Dr. Wang and Dr. Barr. So fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. So let's focus on plagiarism because that's the topic for this morning's webinar. Plagiarism comes from the Latin term plaga, which is a net used by hunters to catch game. But in Latin, it extended its meaning to include a person who stole the words. So it's the act of stealing and passing off the ideas or words of another as one's own, or the act of using another's production without crediting the source. So there are a lot of examples, celebrated examples of plagiarism. I think you will recall that at one time, our good Senator Vicente Soto was called out for using words of a blogger without attribution in one of his speeches, and he never apologized for the misconduct. As you can see, plagiarism is not limited to science. This one is in social media, a speech by Melania Trump during the inauguration of her husband Donald, which said that from a young age, my parents impressed on me the values that you work hard for what you want in life, that your word is your bond and you do what you say, and keep your promise that you treat people with respect. It's so similar to a speech delivered by First Lady Michelle Obama for the same event, the inauguration of Barack Obama, where she said, Barack and I were raised with so many of the same values, that you work hard for what you want in life, that your word is your bond and you do what you're going to do, what you say you're going to do, that you treat people with dignity and respect. And plagiarism not only happens in politics, but in art as well. I think in our own UP campus, a sculpture was donated by the alumni class of an artist, Ferdinand Cacño, in 2017. And it was called out in social media for a very striking resemblance to one that was created by a Dutch artist, Elisabeth Steenstra. So the one in the UP campus is the female oblation, while that of Elisabeth Steenstra is the Virgins of Apeldoorn. So how about in the scientific community? What is the Prevalence of Plagiarism. I've given this in previous talks on research integrity, but this is a meta-analysis, the objective of which is to determine the frequency with which scientists committed plagiarism. This came from a systematic search of literature that showed that several surveys have been conducted asking the same questions to scientists. The general questions are, have you committed plagiarism? Or do you know of colleagues who have committed plagiarism? And a systematic review of 17 studies among scientists who admit or know of plagiarism was published by Vaja Pupovac. Generally, the results are divided into two: the self-reports, and this included the analysis of 7 studies. One paper, curiously, that of Nielsen, I don't know if you can see my pointer, reported no reports of plagiarism, no self-reports of plagiarism. But if you look at the 7 papers, the range is from as low as 1% to as high as 11%. And if we look at the confidence interval, it's as low as 0.3% to as high as 10.7%. And curiously, when scientists were asked if they know of colleagues who committed plagiarism, the results are quite different. So in this analysis, it shows that using the random effects model, that the prevalence is about 29.6%, which ranges from 17 to 45%. And if you look at the lower limits of the confidence intervals, it's as low as 2.5% in the Titus study to as high as 76.4% in the Bedean study. But overall, the prevalence is 29.6%. What is surprising is that when reports are from others or colleagues who have committed plagiarism, the prevalence increases by as high as 12 times compared to self-reports. And I believe that this can still be an underestimate. The same authors had conducted a meta-analysis on falsification and fabrication. And they plotted the prevalence of fabrication and falsification with that of plagiarism. So in the x-axis, it's the prevalence of falsification, fabrication, and other related behaviors. And on the y-axis, it's plagiarism. And they saw that there is a linear relationship. This is for self-reports, and a linear relationship for reports of colleagues, suggesting that research misconduct is a systematic occurrence. And in areas where plagiarism is high, fabrication and falsification is high as well. And in the institutions where plagiarism is low, fabrication and falsification is low as well. So not to depart from our own institution, a publication was done in UP by Miguel Paulo Reyes and Joel Ariate. The faith of authors from the University of the Philippines accused of plagiarism from the 1990s to the 2010s. And this was a case series of 25 cases of plagiarism in scientific publication committed by faculty members and students, mostly graduate students or PhD students from the University of the Philippines. So the methods included review of non-confidential records, key informant interviews, online and print publication, case files of the Student Disciplinary Tribunal. And the results showed that there were 74 verifiable plagiarism cases between 1936 and 2018. And 34 are detailed in a 97-page confidential document that the authors were not able to access. So they only included 25 verifiable plagiarism cases in this report. And to try to summarize the report, all cases were that of students and faculty members of the UP system whose work were considered for publication by a UP publisher. This included 2 textbooks, 1 introduction of an edited book, 3 dissertations, 18 manuscripts for an academic journal. And the results as far as impact to the authors are concerned, in some, the authors were classified as editor or co-author, and were classified as or contributors. Or it may have led to the author's contract not renewed, or the author forced to resign, or the author terminated, or the author's privileges and teaching duties were curtailed. For 2, the doctorate degree was withdrawn. In one case, the author was requested to make adjustments to the manuscript, which was eventually accepted for publication. In one case, the accused was exonerated, and there were, I think, one case where there was no action or awaiting action. And that's the results and how it affected the authors. How about the papers? For the papers, for one, an errata sheet was pasted onto the copies of the book's 2nd edition. For another, a caveat regarding the dissertation's contents were ordered inserted in the copies of the publication. For another, the chapter was rejected and copies of the introduction were removed from printed copies of the book and replaced with a new introduction from a different author. And still for another, the commitment from the head of the constituent university or publisher that plagiarism issues in the book will be taken into account in the materials revision. In one, the manuscript was eventually accepted for publication after the author modifications. There was no action or awaiting action. For another, the article remains accessible online with no retractions issued. And for 16, the manuscript was not accepted. So the conclusions of these studies show that the prevalence of plagiarism is up to 2.5%. For the UP case studies, we cannot determine the prevalence based on these case reports. But it's as low as 2.5% for self-reported cases and up to 45% for reports from others. And there seems to be a linear correlation between fabrication and falsification and plagiarism. So that practically ends my talk. I have discussed research integrity and differentiated it from research ethics. I've discussed the principles of responsible conduct of research. I've defined the research misconduct, specifically fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, and discussed the prevalence of plagiarism. So thank you very much for your attention and have a very good morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mantaring, for that very informative and interesting talk. Indeed, plagiarism is really something that has to be talked about and addressed, no? So, Dr. Wang, at this point, we are now open for questions. We shall now have our open forum for our first set of speakers. So, we will be reading questions for, coming from our attendees po here in the, both here in the Zoom and from Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, just before we start the open forum, we'd like to thank both speakers. Very incisive lectures and very, very good lectures. So we've kept time. We're exactly on time. And this is the open forum now. We have a group that's filtering the questions also. So we'd like to thank them. That's other members of the Research Integrity Committee are doing that. And this is one of the first questions here. This is a question to both Dr. Barr and Dr. Mantaring. Is there an international standard on research integrity? And is there a certifying body?
I think Dr. Barr can answer that better than I can.
The short answer is no. As we've seen, and I'll leave this open for other contributions, but as we've seen, we've actually a shift away from rules and regulations and compliance around very specific things to principles-based policies and codes. And we have, as at institutions as well as at sort of national or economy levels, then there are these sort of principles-based formation of essentially mandatory or compulsory ways of doing research with integrity. That sort of came out of an initiative that is international, that is the World Conferences. They were the first to show that you could have a principles-based approach to describing research integrity and responsible research with a document called the Singapore Statement, which is essentially one page of what research integrity is. And so that happened in 2010, and from then on, there has been a shift across to principles. But you do see institutions, you do see academies and societies having expressions and deciding what they expect. But and Apec is a group or a network that's doing that as well. But you don't see an overall approach, I don't think, or an accreditation body that would be applying overall. But I'm happy to hear other thoughts, of course.
Thank you, sir. As a corollary to that question, do you think research integrity is something that institutions should measure?
Yeah, absolutely. How do we measure it is another thing, and because when you measure something, you sort of change the way that people behave. You sort of just due to the nature of measurement and human behaviour. But it's an interesting thing that I think that we've sort of struggled with, because we measure a number of publications, where publications are. We're not necessarily measuring how people are doing their research ethically or responsibly. So that's something that came out of the Hong Kong conference, was around, well, maybe we should look at recognising things such as open research practices or other indicators that might be good measures of trust and responsible conduct. But again, it's very interesting, and I think it's a real challenge, because at the moment we're measuring probably a number of things that are not fitting integrity very well.
May I ask Dr. Barr if reports of research misconduct have decreased significantly since you incorporated the principles of responsible conduct of research in your institution?
That's a wonderful question. No, they've increased. The presentation and the data that you showed us this morning very, very nicely is that actually we experience under-reporting at our institution compared to what the evidence suggests happens, sort of questionable research practices, which might be considered breaches of integrity, which we have to address in Australia, as well as the serious breaches like plagiarism. So we know that the evidence suggests to us that this happened quite frequently. We don't see the number of cases reflect that one-to-one, but we certainly see, and we kind of expect, that the more that we talk about this, the more rule or principles or rules we put in place, the more initiatives we do, we'll get more and more people coming to us with concerns about potential breaches or misconduct, which is actually probably a really good thing to see, I think. What do you think about that, with the establishment of the committee coming at such a difficult time?
We are only right now trying to find the climate of research integrity through a study that we're doing, but we really haven't looked at or counted the number of reports. We actually haven't received any reports since we started.
Okay, yeah. We think the Research Integrity Advisor Network, this network of researchers, academics who we train and sort of are there at the front line only to provide advice to other researchers, really other students, others. They're quite a good initiative to allow people to come to us or to the system with concerns, because they're parts of the community already. So that's an approach we're using. We think is good, but we don't know whether it works well enough yet, but we think it's a good idea.
Dan, I'd like to ask something, because that's very interesting, how you've come up with this network in your university. Can you just give us a little more detailed description of that network and what kind of people are involved in that network?
Okay, thank you. The Research Integrity Advisor Network is made up of about 30 to 35 academic staff from across our two main campuses, in two of our campuses in Melbourne, but also in RMIT Vietnam, and across disciplines. Typically, they're quite well-established professors, but we also have a number of, I guess you would say, mid-career associate professors, researchers and academics who are quite research active, who are supervising students who have seen a thing or two, but also know about integrity and also know about the way that their research is done in their discipline area, whether it's in engineering or in fashion and design. And we try to provide them with comprehensive training around research integrity, but also having conversations. So being able there to provide advice to people who come to them with concerns. We're pleased with how we're coming together as a community. We're essentially developing a community of practice. They're starting to get more involved in education and training, whether we're doing it or they might do it themselves in their own college. And we're starting to seek their advice around, for example, the COVID-19 guidance that we made. So they're really becoming much more active, and I think that they can see the benefit. We try to incentivize their role, and we're trying to, I guess, really support that idea that they're quite a good initiative. We've used them for advice when we've received cases or at least complaints. To hear that sort of discipline-specific, that nuance around what is responsible, what's ethical. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dan. There's another question here, and I think this should be a question for both of you. How can the principles of research integrity be made more understandable to laymen? Is that the fair question for both of you?
I think the target of research integrity is mainly researchers, so that it really needs to be communicated to the academic community rather than to the layman. But I think the analogy that I borrowed from you, Ed, Dr. Wang, is that it's like integrity in everyday life that is applied to professional research or to science. Honesty, transparency, etc.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Dan?
Oh, I think that's just a wonderful answer. So, I think it's a real challenge, actually, even for established researchers, sometimes to be able to reflect on what the principles are telling them about how they should be doing their research. So, I think it's a great question, and I think it actually it's quite a demanding one for all of us, and how we can actually communicate how important it is to maybe the wider community is also a challenge that we should sort of attempt to address.
Okay. Another question here. What structural approach could academic institutions such as the UP Manila propose to government to maintain research integrity without curtailing the enthusiasm of communicating new information to a wider set of audience, for example, through preprint publications? Any suggestions? Any response to that?
In my opinion, given this present pandemic, I think there is more an advantage to sharing of pre-publication results so that scientists and the public can act on research results even before it's published. But of course, as Dr. Barr has shown, that this is subject to a lot of integrity issues. So I think it's a delicate balance, but definitely there has to be trade-offs when sharing information that's not yet published.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And in some economies or some environments, the response from the government or ministries that are funding or in charge or have some oversight has been to establish investigative bodies to address when things go wrong. But actually, I think the question is highlighting that actually we need a bit more sophisticated discussion or advocacy where we have not only accountability, but also maybe government ministries and funding agencies supporting great research or research quality, so the things that are related to research integrity or underpinned by them. And I think that there's some initiatives, for example, in South Korea, which have established essentially more networking of institutions for research integrity through the Ministry of Education, which is a great approach.
Thank you, sir. There's another interesting question here that goes, how will institutions exercise a balance in addressing a break in research integrity that is due to individuals in an environment where research supervision is still poor? In other words, will a trainee be punished for plagiarizing a paper when there is a weak supervision by the assigned advisor? Anyone?
Dr. Barr.
So it's a wonderful question. It's just a great question. What a great community here. But in Australia, the way that we address when things go wrong has changed profoundly. We stopped using the term research misconduct a lot. So what we did with our new code, and we're thinking about it at RMIT, is where really there are two questions to answer when there's a complaint. Can we trust the research and can we trust the individual? And really what we're looking at is trusting the research in research integrity. We're moving it less away from what the individual's done and how we might punish them or educate them, etc. It's very interesting then, because then we look at the research and can we trust it? And then you get to look at all the mitigating factors or circumstances around that. You get to we try to better understand the nature of the breach as compared to thinking about it as misconduct. So when you do that, you get to see that sometimes people have made mistakes. They're genuine errors, but there's still a breach, so we need to address it. And sometimes there has been poor supervision, poor mentorship, or inadequate resourcing from our institution at another level. And that all goes into the consideration of, well, we need to actually address this breach. We need to address and ensure trust in the research. And all that then information about what do we do with the individual is really important. And it has to be considered for the rights of procedural fairness and the rights of individuals.
In my opinion, it's just like ignorance of the law does not excuse one from the law. So if there is an errant researcher who happens to be a student, I think more and more supervision or more and more accountability should go to the supervisor or to the research mentor. Our National Ethical Guidelines for Research actually has a chapter or a section on the role of the institution and the role of the research advisor as far as ethics is concerned. And I believe that it should extend to research integrity as well. We realize that students aren't permanent entities in the university once they graduate, but the faculty is. And the accountability extends beyond the students' course. So maybe faculty should be more accountable for their students' researches, and that should provide an incentive to the faculty to supervise more or closely. So that's my opinion. But I think that our chancellor should be able to comment on that.
Okay. Thank you, Jojo. Thank you,
Thank
Dan.
you.
We have quite a lot. We have quite a few more questions, but I think we'll have to end the open forum here. And just before we end, I'd like to call on the chancellor, as you suggested, Jojo, to give her a comment.
Okay, so thank you very much again to our speakers. They were very clear and just getting the perspective from another country and then understanding the concepts. I just wanted to comment on a few things. This is really a UP Manila activity, and but we're sharing this webinar with the rest of the community, and I can see that we have close to 2,500 listening to us right now. So actually, this is an institutional. We feel it is the responsibility of the institution to actually help its community of researchers. And when I have a dashboard in UP Manila, and we have just in the past six years that I've been a chancellor, there were 6,000 registered research projects, half of them from students, residents, and fellows. And even during the COVID time, we have 450 active projects. And as you've heard from our speakers, some of the problems, some of the questionable research issues, they don't even know that they're making a mistake, and that's why the main objective of the Committee on Research Integrity was to do a roadshow to explain to our researchers, our faculty, students exactly what are these concepts. So, but in why research integrity at this point? So I just want to share with our viewers that for good research to happen in a university setting, there has to be many components. And actually, during my welcome remarks, I only mentioned the research ethics board, which as you heard from Dr. Mantari, we have the Research Grants Administration Office, which basically tackles the management of doing a research. This is a very big office right now that tackles the contracts, the funding, the reports, and so on. And now we have this Committee on Research Integrity, but there is another office actually that is part of the research environment, and that is the Technology Transfer and Business Development Office. And that's why when somebody asks, how do you protect people? How do you protect now the authors and the researchers when they want to, they also want to protect the intellectual property? So we have another office. This is the TTBDO, Technology Transfer Business Development Office, that actually even helps our researchers improve on their presentation to make sure that they do not disclose things that may have some intellectual property at the end. So I think, as a university or as a college, when you become busier, it is our responsibility to put the elements to make our researcher feel, they feel that they are more equipped and that we're providing the environment. So a single committee is not going to happen. So as I said, in UP Manila, it's a big enterprise at this point, and we felt that this was the missing part. And during the roadshow, we realized that some of our faculty or some of our students didn't know that this was wrong. And instead of just being a police power at the end, we wanted to increase this knowledge so that they can pass it on to students. So if you look at our approach now, is we're providing the environment, and we think that having the Office on Research Integrity now will give a certain level of confidence to our community that we are offering them the protection that they need, because we need the new ideas to come out. We need the ideas and the data for public good. And we have to make sure that our researchers continue to generate the ideas, and that the community, the society, will continue to trust us. A single mistake will put the university in a very... By having this office now is we offer the protection not only for our researchers but also for the reputation of the university. So I hope I've answered some of the concerns that were raised, and there were so many questions actually that came out. But if you stay on until the very end, some of your questions will be answered. I'm sure that we'll be able to answer any other questions after this conference. So once again, thank you. As I said, this is a webinar for the community in UP Manila, which we have decided to share with the rest in the Philippines. So thank you, Dr. Wen. Back to you.
Thank you, Chancellor. That's sort of tied up everything for this first part of the morning forum. And again, I'd like to thank Professor Barr and Professor Mantaring for their 2 lectures and for the open forum, sharing their wisdom and experience. And hopefully later on, Dr. Mantaring will still be with us at the panel discussion. Dr. Barr has another commitment, but just in case you sort of get out of your commitment, we'd like to have you join us at the case discussion too. Okay, thank you, Dan. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Dr. Mantaring. Now, some of the other questions we saw will probably be better fit for the next session. So I think we should just go on to the next session already, Ruf. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, sir. So as plagiarism, as mentioned by Dr. Mantaring in his talk, is among the top 3 research misconduct committed. So we shall now listen to our next set of speakers as they will share to us how plagiarism has affected both the research and the academic world. So to introduce to you our first speaker to talk about plagiarism in scientific publications, our speaker, Dr. Cecilia Maramba Lazarte, is currently the director of the Institute of Herbal Medicine, the National Institutes of Health, University of the Philippines, Manila. She is a Professor 12 and is the Assistant Chair for Research at the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology, with cross-appointment as a clinical professor at the Division of Infectious and Tropical Diseases, Department of Pediatrics, both from the College of Medicine, UP Manila. She was also a former member of the Formulary Executive Council of the Philippine Department of Health, and she has a Master's of Science in Clinical Trials and Master of Science in Infectious Diseases, both from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University of London. Dr. Maramba Lazarte is currently the president of the Philippine Association of Medical Journal Editors. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome Dr. Cecilia Maramba Lazarte. Ma'am Cecil, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Rufus, for that kind introduction. And I'm very honored to be in this esteemed panel, which includes my mentors also. And I was very happy to have this lecture. So I'll be sharing my slides. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes,
we can see
ma'am.
them.
Okay. So the topic given to me is plagiarism in scientific publications. Wait, why doesn't it want to go forward? Okay, and these are my disclosures. I am currently also a active researcher, and sorry, I cannot remove this, cannot read what I'm saying. And the former editor of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society of the Philippines. Aside from this, I have no other conflicts to disclose. So this is what we'll be talking about in the next few minutes, a little introduction, and thankfully being the third speaker, a lot of some of the definitions have already been stated. And I want to talk about the stakeholders in the publication process, no? The authors, the peer reviewers, and the editors, and what would their role be in plagiarism, how to prevent it, and what are some of the standards, probably we could call them, that we follow in dealing with plagiarism. So these are my references, and I was very careful to make sure I included those that I have stated in my slides. Okay, so this was already talked about earlier. some definitions. So plagiarism, as defined by the World Association of Medical Editors, is the use of others' published and unpublished ideas or words or other intellectual property without attribution or permission and presenting them as new and original rather than derived from an existing source. Now, there is an intent to deceive. We considered this an unethical publication practice. It is actually pretty common, and it erodes the trust in research and may even hamper scientific progress. It is misleading for future researchers and funding agencies, and as said earlier by Dr. Jojo, it brings disreputation to researchers, the institution, and even the journal. So just to add to the magnitude of the problem, there is actually a database of retracted articles. And in April 1, 2020, from that database, there were 2,280 documents retracted for plagiarism alone. But this is a very limited database as it only includes index journals and does not include non-index journals. So definitely this is very much underestimated. And there are several types of plagiarism. Could be plagiarism of ideas, plagiarism of text, self-plagiarism, collusion, and patchwriting. So plagiarism of ideas is the theft of a new idea or a theory presented anywhere. So it could have even been during a conference or an abstract or a poster. And the plagiarist then conducts research based on this idea or theory and presents this theory as if it was their own without acknowledging the original source. Another is plagiarism of text, which is the most common form of plagiarism in medical research writing. It is also called copy-cut paste or word-to-word writing. It is common that some researchers take whole paragraphs from published articles and think it is permissible as long as they cite the reference at the end of the paragraph. In fact, this is plagiarism of text. Scientific findings are allowed to be taken from other articles, but not their language or the exact paragraph that they wrote. There is also what we call self-plagiarism, and this occurs when a researcher uses substantial parts of his research in two different publications that uses the same findings or illustrations without referring to the previous publication. This is also known as redundant data. So, in real research, authors sometimes publish a series of articles of one research problem, and it is very common that the author uses his previous findings for his next article, but they should always cite the previous article that they wrote. The other is collusion, allowing someone else, such as professional agencies or agencies, with or without paying money to write a piece of work, and then the plagiarist presents it as if it is his or her own. This is also a form of illegal, unauthorized cooperation with the intent to deceive. And another is patchwriting. This is copying parts of another work and changing a few words or order of words to make it appear as original. But this should not be confused with paraphrasing, which is taking a fact from a source, then writing it in your own language and style, but of course, attributing this to the original source. I made a short informal survey of some of our officers in the PAMJE, and they've seen all of these types of plagiarisms in their term as editors or even as peer reviewers, but the most common that they see is probably the copy paste and the write to word type of Plagiarism. I wanted to present to you the editing and review system that goes on in a editorial office, no? And we can find ways here where we can prevent plagiarism. So at the start, the author submits his manuscript and the editor will screen this manuscript and see if it is appropriate for the journal. If it is indeed appropriate, it is given to peer reviewers for review, and it goes on that if there is a decision on the manuscript, it is the author is informed. The author may be asked to make modifications. There is final copy editing, and a proof of the final manuscript is shown to the author before it is actually published. Usually at any point that during this whole process, the manuscript can actually be prevented from being published, especially if there is questions of integrity or plagiarism during this process. So these are our stakeholders during the manuscript writing, reviewing, and publication. No? Our author, your peer reviewer, the editor or editorial office, and we'd like to see how we can prevent plagiarism and what are the rules actually of these stakeholders in this concept of plagiarism. So what are the responsibilities of the researchers and authors? No? So they should adhere to the ethical conduct of research, credit the source, use quotation marks when necessary if they really quote verbatim from a certain source, and of course they have to give credit to the source, paraphrase certain parts, but of course still credit the source. And since the similarity checkers are out there and there are some free similarity checkers, the author should also do this himself to check if there are any questions on plagiarism. Aside from this, from other sources, to follow proper scientific methodology, the sources used should also be reliable, no? Not from retracted articles. If the idea or text are from one's own previous published work, it needs to be cited to avoid this self-plagiarism. And the references should be mentioned in complete bibliographic information. And of course, be honest with yourself. From my point of view, and I've seen some problems with it, some junior researchers actually don't know that you can only submit your manuscript to one journal at a time, no? So this is not like applying for college wherein you can submit your manuscript to 5 journals and then wait who will accept it. That's not acceptable, no? Because you waste so many resources of that journal. You're only allowed to submit to one journal at a time. Okay, and make sure you read and follow the instruction to the authors of that chosen journal. Many journals will also have publication agreements, no, and asking you that your manuscript is original and that all authors agree to what is being submitted. Okay, so that is for the authors. Now, for peer reviewers, no, they are very important components of the publication process, no? And they evaluate article submissions to the journal based on requirements of that journal. So they help in keeping the quality of the journal to a certain standard. They look at the completeness and the accuracy of the research presented. They can also provide feedback on the paper and suggest improvements. They make a recommendation to the editor, about whether to accept, reject, or request changes to the article. But the final decision on what happens to the manuscript rests with the editor, but the reviewers definitely play a significant role in determining the outcome. So what are the responsibilities of the reviewer? They should ensure that the methods and analysis are adequately detailed to allow the reader to judge the scientific merit of the study design and be able to replicate the study. They should ensure that the article cites all relevant work by other scientists on that particular topic that is being discussed in the manuscript. So, as we know, the peer reviewers are usually content experts on what the article is all about. So they are usually very well read on that topic, and they would recognize if some relevant work has not been cited. So they are very important in identifying fraud and plagiarism during the review process by virtue of their familiarity with the material and other published articles, as well as material presented at conferences on the subject. Now, this is one case which I found from the Apec case files. It was a plagiarism in a review article from which a peer reviewer was able to point out. So there was a review article spontaneously submitted and sent out to 3 peer reviewers. And one of the reviewers expressed serious concerns about the paper. And she explained that the style was very familiar. There were large chunks of the text, and most of the references had been plagiarized from a teaching syllabus that he or she had actually written some time ago on the same subject. And one of the 2 authors on the review article had attended this teaching session and would have received a copy of the syllabus. Having informed the 2 other peer reviewers that the paper was being temporarily withdrawn from the peer review process while the allegations were being investigated, the editor also contacted the other authors about the alleged plagiarism. So because of her background on this subject, and it was actually she herself who was being plagiarized, she was able to catch this act. Okay, so now let's go to the editor or the editorial office. The editors are responsible and accountable for everything published in their journals. So even the ads that are there, they have some accountability also. They should have a process to ensure the quality of the material they publish and should maintain the integrity of the academic record. They should also be willing to publish corrections, clarifications, retractions, and apologies when necessary. In many instructions to the authors and policies of editorial offices, they require that a certification be made that the manuscript is original. Usually there's this form letter that is asked by the editors for the authors to sign, and a certification that the manuscript was not submitted to any other journal. Okay, so you could catch issues of plagiarism during the editorial process and publication when the author submits the manuscript. So usually in the instructions to the authors, it is good that the editorial office would define what their definition of plagiarism is and what is their policy. A lot of editorial offices already do similarity checks at this point in time, no? But not all editorial offices do, but many already start at this point. So if there are no problems and the editor deems that the manuscript is appropriate for the journal and it is given to the peer reviewer, then the peer reviewer should take time out to really review the paper. Sometimes it takes 2-3 hours or even more to review a paper. And if there is any plagiarism that they think occurs, the peer reviewer should flag this right away and tell the editor. Now, sometimes the manuscript goes through even if there are some unchecked plagiarism which occurred and it is published. And after publication, some readers may recognize the plagiarism in the publication, and it is the editor's duty to address the concerns of the readers. So this is an organization that you should know about, and it is also a very good resource, not only for editors, but even for the academe to look at some standards on publication and misconduct. This is the Committee on Publication Ethics. It is based in the UK. It is a non-profit organization. They provide advice and guidance on best practices for dealing with ethical issues in journal publishing, for editors and publishers. But I'm very sure even universities will learn from what their guidance has. So I'm just mentioning some excerpts from the Code of Conduct for journal editors in dealing with possible misconduct. Editors have a duty to act if they suspect misconduct or an allegation of misconduct is brought to them. So they shouldn't just sweep it under the rug and pretend it did not exist. So this extends to both published and unpublished papers. Editors should not simply reject papers that raise concerns, but they are ethically obliged to pursue alleged cases. Editors should follow the COPE flowcharts, and I'll show an example in a while. Editors should first seek response from those suspected of misconduct. So they should also be heard out on what their role is. If they are not satisfied with the response, they should ask the relevant employers or institution or some appropriate body to investigate. Editors should also make all reasonable efforts to ensure that a proper investigation into alleged misconduct is conducted. And try to make sure that there is also a resolution to this problem. So this is an example of a COPE flow chart. So this particular one is about if you suspect plagiarism in a submitted manuscript. So it hasn't been published yet. It's still growing through the processing prior to publication. So let's just go a little bit into it. So it's probably most likely a reviewer who informs the editor about suspected plagiarism. Thank the reviewer and say you plan to investigate, but get full documentary evidence if not already provided. So what's very important is checking the degree of copying. Is it just minor copying of short phrases only, of the research paper? Is this a non-native language speaker or no misattribution of data? So if it's just minor copying, contact the author in neutral terms, expressing or explaining the journal's position, and ask the author to rephrase the copied phrases or include as direct quotations with references and proceed with the review. If there is no problem, then just discuss this with the reviewer. But if there is clear plagiarism, unattributed use of large portions of text and or data and presented as if they were by the plagiarist, contact the corresponding author in writing, ideally enclosing a signed authorship statement. Well, this is usually given at the start, no? That they signed that this was supposed to be original, and get the side of the author. Okay. So the author responds. Okay. And if you get a satisfactory explanation, was it really an honest error, or the journal instructions were not very clear, or this was a first time writer, no, and he's not well versed of what plagiarism is all about, no? So write to the authors, rejecting submission or requesting revision, and explain disposition and expected future behavior, and of course inform your reviewer. But if there is unsatisfactory explanation, it seems unbelievable what the author is saying, and or if the author admits guilt, write to the author rejecting submission, explaining position and expected future behavior. Consider informing the author's superior and or persons responsible for research governance and or potential victim. No? So these are very nice flow charts which give you some clear direction on what to do. And this flow chart is for a publication that is already, for a manuscript that has already been published. Okay, so it's usually the reader, no? Maybe months later, a reader saw the paper and suspected plagiarism. Okay, thank the reader and say you plan to investigate and try to get a full documentary evidence if the reader can provide the evidences that it was plagiarized. Again, check the degree of copying. If it is only minor, like just short phrases, then maybe you could just do a correction, discuss this with the author to do a correction. But again, if there is clear plagiarism, large portions and data presented as if they were made by the author, so again, contact the corresponding author in writing. Okay, ideally enclose what they have signed before, okay, and wait for their response. Okay, so of course, hear their side. If they give a satisfactory explanation, it was really an honest error, or again, a very junior researcher who was not familiar with all these ethics, no? So write to the author explaining the position and possibly retracting the paper. But if it is unsatisfactory explanation or the author admits his guilt, contact all authors and tell them what you plan to do. Consider publishing a retraction, inform the editor of other journals involved or publisher of the plagiarized book, and consider informing author superior or persons responsible for research governance of authors institution. It sounds easy on paper, but it's not very easy to do all these things that has been said. So as mentioned by Dr. Jojo, are there penalties? Well, there have been penalties depending on the gravity of the situation. From the journal, the manuscript can be rejected. If it hasn't been published, the article could be retracted. If it is already published, the author could be blacklisted and banned from any new submissions to that particular journal. For academic institutions, the author can be suspended, terminated, their degree withdrawn or dismissed. From funding agencies, they could also be banned from applying for new projects and funding. So I think this is my final slide. Intentional plagiarism shall result in harm to the author, to the academic institution, the journal, and of course the public. As author responsible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecil. Thank you, Cecil, for taking us through that complete cycle, no?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm pretty sure our audience will find that very, very useful, especially to our budding researchers and, of course, our seasoned researchers as well. So before we introduce our next speaker, sir, I would just like to remind everybody that we will be posting the link for the evaluation for you to be able to get a certificate after by the end of our of this webinar. So a link, please watch out for the link later for you to be able to access the evaluation. And then after you fill out that evaluation form, you will be immediately sent a copy of your e-certificate in your emails. So there.
Okay.
So, sir, you may now introduce our next speaker.
Yep. Thanks, Rufus. And just before I introduce the next speaker, just to let you know that the question and answer kasi sobrang dami pumapasok. We try to answer some of the questions, but there's also a lot of overlap. So during the open forum, you can ask your questions, and during the case discussions, I think many of them will be addressed also. Okay, so we now go to our fourth speaker, and I am very proud and I have the honor to introduce our fourth speaker, Dr. Maria Cynthia Rose Banson Bautista. She is the Vice President for Academic Affairs of the UP System and current member of the Board of Trustees of the Philippine Institute of Development Studies. She is also Professor of Sociology, and she served as longtime Executive Director of the University Center for Integrative and Development Studies. She was also Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy before her secondment to the Commission on Higher Education as Commissioner from March 2012 to September 2016. So here we have Professor and Vice President Bautista. You have the floor, and she will talk to us on plagiarism in the academe.
Morning, Chancellor Padilla, as well as the hardworking and well-chosen members of the Committee on Research Integrity and all those who are joining us today. May I just put off my video because my internet is stable. So I'll come back when it becomes more stable. And maybe I should share my screen first. So the University of the Philippines, more specifically UP Manila, is currently in the process of setting up the Office of Research Integrity in support of an organizational culture that reflects UP's commitment to research excellence and high standards of personal conduct and integrity, but also ensures that academic misconduct and fraud are avoided, and if not, are dealt with fairly and firmly. We are excited by this initiative and look forward to the establishment of the office as a prototype for a similar office in the other constituent universities of the UP system. There were also preliminary discussions at the system level and among colleagues in other CUs about the operationalization of the country's open data policy that is aligned with data privacy and allows for varying levels of access. These preliminary discussions dealt with data sharing and creating a depository of research data. Had the pandemic not hit us, these discussions would have laid the groundwork for a consultative conference in 2020. One identified advantage of doing this is putting researchers on their toes regarding the integrity of their research and their data. But I am not here to discuss the university initiatives that relate to research integrity. My agenda this morning is twofold: to underscore the value of research integrity in a global context of fake news, alternative realities, and the spread of an anti-intellectual and anti-scientific culture on one hand, and the specific context of the Philippines as a developing society where a scientific culture has yet to take root. And also to share a few points on plagiarism as a more common form of of research misconduct or academic fraud. I thank the previous speakers for enlightening and instructive inputs to our understanding of research integrity and plagiarism. Why research integrity? Let me situate this question in context and answer it tangentially and in a roundabout way and from a very different angle. The University of the Philippines is a member of the Asia-Pacific Rim Universities, or APRU, a network of leading research universities in the Asia-Pacific region. In 2019, I was invited to share some reflections on the topic, Public Trust and the Changing Role of the University, in the 2018 meeting of the presidents of the Asia-Pacific Rim Universities. The topic intrigued me, so I asked informally for the motivation behind a session on public trust in universities in a forum that focused on the impact of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I was also intrigued because public trust in universities in the Philippines and even in Singapore, the other ASEAN country represented in the panel, that was the National University of Singapore, remains high, if in the Philippines only because of the society's penchant for higher education degrees and for credentialing. But in the course of an informal orientation meeting on the evening before the session, I began to understand that in APRU member jurisdictions like the United States, Asia-Pacific Rim universities are actually connecting the American universities on the Pacific side, the Australian universities, East Asia, and ASEAN. So in the course of that discussion, I know that in jurisdictions like the United States, public trust in universities is being eroded by countercultures that undermine the value of truth, knowledge, and science. The recent developments in the US, the unscientific COVID narratives from high government officials, and the very real consequences of the peddled alternative reality of an election steal attest to this. This reminded me of 3 articles I read before the conference that dealt before that particular APRU meeting that dealt with what seemed to be a worldwide phenomenon of post-truth politics, which continues to prevail today. Specifically, The Economist published The Art of the Lie, The New York Times, The Age of Post-Truth Politics, and Salon, Trump's Lies Are Not Unique to America, Post-Truth Politics Are Killing Democracies in Both Sides of the Atlantic. Citing Mr. Trump as a leading exponent of post-truth politics, but expanding the exponents to include other leaders, The Economist described post-truth politics as a reliance on assertions that feel true, but have no basis in fact. Absurd claims or fabricated facts systematically and persistently disinform using the algorithm of social media like Facebook. The Salon article specifically decried the fabrication of truth as a way to get to the top in the US electoral politics and to continue winning supporters. It bewailed the seeming reality that we may not even be sharing the same wavelength anymore. Gone is a time when we differed in our analysis, differed in our proposed solutions to problems, but agreed on the same facts. Accordingly, many now feel entitled to their own facts. This is in contrast to the once accepted constructed reality of a consensus over facts, which is being chipped away by fabricated facts. But more than the fabrication of facts, the Salon is a journal, a magazine, was concerned about the death of the, in quotes, the death of the belief in fact. This manifests in at least two instances. Since everyone is entitled to construct his own taken for granted fact, what was once consensually agreed upon is no longer regarded as such, but is replaced instead in the constructed reality by the fabricated facts. And two, what the economists found new and disconcerting was the relegation of truths or facts to secondary importance. Feelings are what matter more than the veracity of statements. The relativity and marginalization of facts or truth in a post-truth era that these reputable magazines consider a new development reflects a profound nuancing of the Enlightenment utopian vision of the role of knowledge and expertise in forging political consensus. In the utopian vision of the Enlightenment, such privilege presupposes that citizens and their leaders would, in a rational fashion, privilege the knowledge produced by science and other experts, accept the criteria that scientists and other experts use as given, including the criteria for choosing desirable and feasible options from among technical solutions. Against this backdrop, it is imperative to reassert the Enlightenment's vision of the power of truth, knowledge, and science that emerged and flourished within its frame. One can reassert this vision in the public mind through the impact of scientific research. Support for research in the United States, for instance, after the World War II, which was a program the United States actually pursued, yielded a harvest of countless discoveries and innovations in a wide range of areas. Developments in the medical and biological sciences concerned with health, food and genes, developments in physics and astronomy that led to lasers, radar, transistors, MRI technology, developments in the earth sciences that advanced their understanding of earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, global warming, ozone depletion, and the birth and growth of computer technology, the internet, nanotech, artificial intelligence, global positioning systems, all of these, because of their impact on everyday life, helped in making science culture take root. How does research integrity figure in this advocacy to reassert the vision of the environment and enlightenment, even in the developed world? As Professor Wang and Dr. Barr expanded earlier, research integrity is the foundation of trust within the academic scientific community that enables its members to build on each other's work, leading to impactful research. When I was in high school, one of my best teachers stressed the cumulative nature of science and that science grows cumulatively because of trust in the proper application of the scientific method. That one stuck in my head. In the time of COVID, this is best illustrated in the story of Kati Carico, which the New York Times featured very recently. Kathleen's obsession as she moved from one lab to another in a fragile, untenured career with studying the messenger RNA or mRNA, the genetic script that carries DNA instructions to each cell's protein-making machine, which she was convinced would instruct cells to make their own medicine, and her work with Dr. Drew Weissman, laid the foundation for the Pfizer, Entech, and Moderna vaccines. Trust in the integrity of their work allowed for the development of these vaccines. The same level of trust in the integrity of research findings is necessary to slowly develop trust in science and a science culture, developing a science culture in a society like the Philippines. In our highly unequal society, where the poor remains a significant segment of the population, public expectations of universities as sites of knowledge production or source of expertise for evidence-based policymaking and technologies are not clear except to the intelligentsia, although there is widespread recognition of the concentration of experts in universities. The university's research activities are still perceived as academic pursuits that do not impact everyday life. So I think, in a sense, COVID is catalyzing this. We're thankful to UP Manila because of the projection of UP Manila, the projection of the Philippine Genome Center, because that also helps make people understand on the ground that science and research is necessary. For the general Filipino public, universities are not recognized as sites of knowledge production that can translate to technologies that are useful to the economy and the people. Neither is the translation of knowledge into technologies salient in the public mind. The culture of science is not yet prevalent, but slowly we can make that happen. As in the developed world, research integrity is the foundation for building on each other's research for impact on the life of ordinary Filipinos. Building on research that has no integrity, in other words, that is fraudulent, will not accumulate towards productive outputs. This underscores the importance of building a research culture where academic honesty and integrity are deeply ingrained. Let me now move to reflections on plagiarism as a form of academic fraud or misconduct that not only undermines trust in an academic or scientific community, but also stunts the development of original ideas in the plagiarist. Why is plagiarism wrong, qualitatively wrong? Reflecting on qualitatively right or wrong acts, political philosopher John Stuart Mills argued that actions are qualitatively better when done for others. They provide greater happiness. Similarly, particular actions are wrong not only because they do not bring happiness, but in fact cause harm, inflict or cause pain on others. While it is morally right, this is still John Stuart Mill's rephrased, while it is still morally right to pursue the greatest happiness, it is qualitatively better to avoid performing acts that bring unhappiness to others. By degree of level of harm or cost, Mills listed the following wrongful acts: failure to speak the truth or lying, stealing or depriving the other, and taking another's life. These three wrongful acts cause injustice to another within the community and the public at large. Plagiarism, as the act of passing off the words, ideas, works of others as one's own, is both failing to speak the truth or lying, and is a form of theft for academic advantage or gain for oneself. It is thus morally wrong, however one looks at it. As a form of intellectual dishonesty, plagiarism is objectionable, especially in the university, where the search for truth, no matter where it leads, is the primary value. From the perspective of the academic and research community that build on each other's work, it is objectionable because it reflects a lack of respect for the members of the community one has taken ideas or works from without proper acknowledgements, weakening bonds that are necessary for the community of scholars to thrive. From the perspective of the plagiarist, it is self-defeating. Not only does it weaken trust within the community, it has disastrous consequences for his or her career within academia. And Dr. Lazarte actually gave us an idea of what happens to those who actually are plagiarized, depending on the level of plagiarism. The Code of Students of the University provides the sanctions for various forms of intellectual dishonesty, such as plagiarism. Dr. Mantaring earlier pointed to empirical evidence of how common plagiarism may be. However, we were actually flagged by a retired American professor who has been helping mentor our students of intellectually dishonest practices, possibly forms of plagiarism that our students engage in without awareness of what they are doing or that it is wrong. We had planned a face-to-face meeting with him, but the pandemic struck before we could do so. This initial information was bothersome. It reminds me of undergraduate students in my classes a long time ago who were not aware what they were doing was plagiarism and that it was wrong. It tells us that we have to walk extra miles to orient our students to various forms of plagiarism that actually Dr. Lazarte mentioned earlier. And then and basically instill in them the value of intellectual and research integrity. As Chancellor Padilla mentioned, the fact that students may not be aware suggests that many cases of plagiarism are accidental and could be avoided if students were just made more aware of their own writing and research practices. They may not know what constitutes plagiarism or have not developed the academic skill to not over-rely on the work of others. I guess we have to train our students to also think independently in more originally. Thankfully, technology now allows us to catch various forms of plagiarism. The university, for instance, now subscribes to Turnitin, the Turnitin software, which enables the faculty to detect various forms of plagiarism. Turnitin's plagiarism spectrum, for instance, provides 12 types of unoriginal work, ranging from traditional forms that we are all familiar with, direct plagiarism, self-plagiarism, mosaic or patchwork plagiarism, and the other plagiarisms that Dr. Lazarte mentioned earlier, as well as emerging ones that students must be made aware of. Having such plagiarism tests is itself a deterrent. In other words, having Turnitin and having other tests of plagiarism and other detectors of plagiarism deters students from being as careless as before. It was harder in my time because we had to rely on intuition and a sensitivity to a change of tone in the student's piece. Managing students who plagiarize then varied from one faculty member to another. Some automatically failed such students. Others, like me, failed the students only in a requirement and used the occasion as a teaching moment. But interestingly, when I was listening to Dr. Lazarte, during that time, it depends also on the degree of the plagiarism. Depending on my assessment too of the willful commitment of the act or really willfully doing it, students were allowed to correct the paper. Students are not the only ones vulnerable to plagiarism. Of the traditional forms of plagiarism, self-plagiarism was at one time a very, very gray area. So when Ariarte and Miguel Reyes did their study of the ones that were mentioned earlier by Dr. Jojo, at that time, maybe self-plagiarism, even the university officials, there was a certain ambivalence on how to handle it. But at this time, we are more familiar with self-plagiarism. Dual or duplicate publication as a form of self-plagiarism may be the type of plagiarism faculty members are more vulnerable to. In the past, this was gray area. Now it is more defined. Game and West, in their online article on the principles of publishing, define dual or duplicate publication as occurring, and I quote, when authors pass off as original research that has been published either substantially or in its entirety elsewhere. Duplicate papers have shared hypotheses, data, discussion points, or conclusions, but do not cross-reference the prior publication. Not only does duplicate publication constitute a possible copyright violation, it also deceives the scientific community as to the extent of knowledge in a given field. And in another part of that article, they say that if the work has previously been published only as a conference abstract or as a working paper, this does not constitute duplicate publication since these tend to have a limited audience. Indeed, many institutions actively encourage the use of conferences and working paper series as routes to developing ideas for journal articles. Let me give two additional notes. Duplicate publication excludes translations of the same article in another language for as long as it is properly cited. The same article cannot be submitted to two publication outlets at the same time, which Dr. Lazarte actually emphasized earlier, to avoid copyright infringements. As a concluding note, let me return to the situation we are in now. An assault on truth, knowledge, rationality, science, and expertise on the global front, where once these Enlightenment values frame discourses and cultures in the developed world, and the need for these values to grow in our part of the world. In a sense, higher education institutions are caught in a struggle for the restoration of space in the public mind and culture globally, or a struggle to restore trust in universities, as that session that we had in APRU actually state. And for an increasing share of the space in a country like ours. This struggle makes it imperative for the academic or the scientific community to be a community that trusts and shares each other's research findings. Research integrity is the foundation of the trust in this community. This is why research misconduct that undermines this trust and solidarity should be avoided at all costs. Plagiarism being such form of misconduct that vexes the spirit and foments mistrust and divisions among the members of the community. Against this backdrop, the initiative of UP Manila to set up the Office of Research Integrity is laudable. It is an institutional means to develop an organizational and personal culture of research integrity by raising the level of awareness of our faculty, researchers, trainees, and students about its importance and misconducts and of the importance of knowing about misconducts. And it serves too, and it will serve in the future as arbiter of breaches of research integrity, and like they do with publications and like what editors do, maybe that nice flow chart can also be generalized and applied to us. So just as UP Manila's Code of Responsible Conduct of Research, which was developed in July, has now been generalized for adoption by the UP system within the next 2 weeks, I am looking forward personally to the formal morphing of this Committee on Research Integrity into the Office of Research Integrity by the end of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Bautista, and thank you, Professor Maramba Lasarte. That was like listening to a professor of medicine, a journal editor-in-chief, a vice president, a professor of sociology, and everything put together in like half an hour. So this was really a dream team. So it was so informative and initiated a lot of reflection on our part. So thank you very much. We have a short amount of allotted time for open forum just before we go to the case discussions. Rufus, would you like to start reading some of the questions?
Sure, sir. Sige po. We could probably start with this question. This is an interesting one. To either VP Bautista or si Ma'am Cecil. Is there a standard of what constitutes plagiarism in terms of allowable percentage of quoted or paraphrased texts?
Ma'am, you want to start or ako na lang?
Maybe start and then I'll follow you.
Okay. So, according to WAME, dun sa how many words. So, if you're using 6 words in consecutive words from a certain taken from a certain paragraph, that is allegedly plagiarism. No, but let's think of that in context. Ang dami kasing 6 words na tuloy-tuloy na it's been used many times. Kunyari, pangalan ng isang guideline na kay haba at inulit mo yun, di naman pwedeng sabihin plagiarism yun. No? So, although itong mga, this will actually be discussed later, no, about the similarity checkers. Just the short answer for now is, ako personally, there's no percentage. You really have the human decision making to do. The similarity checker will tell you, yes, there is words that may be similar, but again, a human brain should look at this, analyze this, and say, totoo bang plagiarism to? Hindi. Kaya nga, we don't want to call them plagiarism checkers anymore. We want to call them similarity checkers.
So I agree with Dr. Lazarte. I guess a certain similarity may be unavoidable as long as it's properly referenced. There is no, as far as I know, and maybe Dr. Lazarte would know more, there is no real standard. So a percentage similarity may be acceptable, for instance, as long as it's properly referenced. But what percentage of similarity is acceptable? I guess this is where the human, as Dr. Lazarte puts it, this is where the human brain will have to operate. And it's also human judgment. I guess we have to really judge. See, there's a lot of plagiarism. We were all talking about general statements about plagiarism, but there's a lot of nuancing that has to be done. So I was very happy with Dr. Lazarte's flow chart, because the flow chart actually says it's not as straightforward as once you do something that it's straightforward plagiarism. Willfulness comes in there, and maybe even willfulness and understanding, awareness and willfulness. So there's no, you also judge in terms, is it 30%, 20%? It's the substance. Diba? You also judge the article. It depends on what actually was being cited. So
sometimes you also look at, when we're talking about publication, what part of the publication had similarity indices, no? So if you're talking about the introduction, baka pwedeng, some parts may be similar. If you're talking about the methods, which is a very common method, no? Some amount of similarity will really be acceptable, no? If you're talking about results, you should never have similarity in results. That's a no-no. When you're talking about discussion, maybe some amount may be acceptable, but your whole discussion should not be similar. And same with the conclusion. Hindi rin dapat siya similar sa ibang papel.
Okay. Thank you po. So, Ma'am Cecil, as a follow-up to that, like for example, you have an expert that quotes a common knowledge. Would that be plagiarism if that expert didn't quote that, didn't have a reference for that particular
general pag common knowledge, hindi siya plagiarism.
Right.
But again, judgment, what is common knowledge, di ba?
Right. Oo nga po. Right. Okay, sir?
Okay, Rufus. We'll keep the open forum short, and we'll be going into the case discussions. But we're going to just end the open forum. I want to call on Vice Chancellor Crisostomo, who will have some reflections naman on plagiarism in relation to the teachers and faculty.
Yes, thank you for all the marvelous presentations. I realize though that probably majority of the participants here are not just researchers, but are teachers as well. So these are my reflections on our role as educators with regards to the problem of plagiarism. Plagiarism has become easier nowadays because of digital technology. And Cecil has mentioned this term called cut and paste plagiarism. Very easy to get, whole paragraphs and passages and just place it in your discussion and pass it off as their own. But I think we have a very important role as educators to play. First, we need to serve as role models. Oftentimes, as faculty, we're asked to make presentations in front of small conferences or even big conventions. And it should be our habit that in all practically of the slides that we show or to educate others, we need to properly cite the references that we use when we project certain ideas. Certainly not all ideas we project are our original, and therefore it is our responsibility to make the appropriate citations in the materials that we share, educationally or even in private. Secondly, I think we should demand this from our students as well. And I think many of you have this experience. Our students will make, presentations, some with bar graphs, tables, etc., without even making a citation on where they got it from. Okay? And we should again insist that this become a habit for them. We should require them to cite the sources of the materials that they present to us. Because if we do not call their attention, they will think that it's okay. And this leads to that attitude that or lack of acknowledgement that it is a problem. Okay, so those are just my comments.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Armand. Thank you, VC. I think we can go now to the next session, which will be the case discussions. This will be very interesting. So let's call on the two moderators for the case discussion part, Dr. Jean Toral and Dr. Kathy Reyes.
Good morning, everyone. It has been an enlightening and enriching webinar so far. So I hope the cases that we will present will make it, you can relate to the cases that we will present. So let us have the first case, please. So this case is entitled Calling Out a Plagiarist. A teaching hospital holds annual research contest among its trainees. At the time of judging for this particular contest, there were no plagiarism software employed by the hospital yet. One of the judges, Mr. J, has the habit of doing manual checks of areas of text which he thinks are directly lifted and copied from the literature. The best paper in that batch was declared the winner. Mr. J, during the deliberation, did not mention his finding that the paper was heavily plagiarized, the verbatim type or the copy-cut paste type of plagiarism. Instead, what Mr. J did was he went inconspicuously to the winner, Dr. W, after the awarding and advised him to rewrite the paper, advising him to be more careful with plagiarism. The winning paper was eventually published and presented at a congress several years later. Okay, so let's have the panelists. Now, maybe I should call first Professor VP Bautista because what is her opinion if you were one of the judges and you knew that the paper was heavily plagiarized? Would you have done the same as Mr. J?
I guess Mr. J must have had his reasons. But if I were one of the judges and I knew that the paper was heavily plagiarized, I would let the committee awarding the prize know that the paper was plagiarized. The teaching hospital policy on intellectual dishonesty involving its trainees will then apply. For example, a student disciplinary case may be filed against a student or trainee, but that depends, again, on the assessment, depending upon this is the human brain, looking at the nuance of this particular case. But personally, I would inform the committee that it was heavily plagiarized, maybe not put this person in a very embarrassing situation later on.
Okay, so because you mentioned about a code of students, no, so it has an intellectual dishonesty as one of the items in that code. But do we have something like a flow chart also, similar to what the publishers have, like what Dr. Lazar showed?
Thank you for that question, because while Dr. Cecil was presenting earlier, I said, oh, no, that's what we really need. I mean, we have to have something like that to also guide so that we are not exceptionally harsh, but at the same time, we also send signals. So we should do that.
Yeah.
And those points actually are applicable. It's just a matter of rephrasing.
So it goes the same way, no? For students in a contest, it's probably not a contest setting, just scenarios, just a contest in this case. Dr. Lazarte, what would you have done?
What I would have done if I already caught it while checking, usually kasi many of us as being guest judges, no, they give out the papers before the presentation for us to judge the written paper. So if at that point, no, I think that's where he caught the cut and paste sort of thing, I would have already flagged the organization or the institution who was holding this contest, no? Dapat hindi na nakarating dun sa contest proper na hindi na re-resolve tong plagiarism na to. So, flag them, let them investigate, meron ba o wala, even before the contest, para it's already resolved prior to the contest. So, it depends on their institution if they will take out the paper or they will ask him to revise it, no? Pero dapat hindi na umabot dun sa contest kung alam na niyang there's something wrong with the paper.
That is where the role of the supervising investigator comes in, no? Because we assume this is a junior researcher, he's a trainee, so that's why the role of the supervising investigator is very important. At that point, the supervising investigator must have checked already if there are areas of plagiarism in the work, no, before it gets to the contest.
Maybe just to add another important dimension, ito naman yung humanitarian dimension, di ba? This is a teaching moment for Dr. W, I mean, the trainee. It's a teaching moment. So on one hand, if it already, tama si Dr. Cecil, it shouldn't have reached the contest. If it reached the contest and it wasn't detected earlier, then it shouldn't have been, it will not be given along the award, diba? So that he will not be embarrassed. But yes, the supervising, the mentor, whoever, must also speak with him, because this guy apparently would have, maybe if he did not plagiarize, maybe there's something in this guy in terms of potential, diba? So that this guy actually is able to learn from this experience.
So the case is also, it's not just a lesson for the junior researcher, it's also a lesson for the mentor. It's also a lesson for the administrator, no? So giving out the award into somebody who doesn't deserve it. So those are so many aspects of this case, no? So can you recommend a way of how to break the habit of verbatim plagiarism in the community, students, researchers, Professor Bautista?
Maybe teach the students to run their work in plagiarism checkers before submitting it. Kasi, maybe they don't know, or maybe they're not aware that there's certain things that they're just saying and then it wasn't cited. If they are able to go through plagiarism checkers and then they get that habit of letting things go, then they also learn, diba? Maybe that's one way of breaking the habit.
And we're happy to say that UP Manila has Turnitin, no? So the students and the researchers are already very much aware of plagiarism than before. Dr. Crisostomo is raising his hand, sir.
I wanted to share because I did have a previous experience very much like Mr. J. I served as a judge in a research contest, and lo and behold, one of the papers plagiarized my work, almost word for word. The only difference were the results. Only the tables were different, but everything from the introduction, the methodology, the discussion was exactly my work. And so, of course, I did very similar to what Cecil did. I called the attention of the chairman of the department hosting the research contest, and I said, if you know what's good for you, I will pull this paper out, because it will be very embarrassing if I call him out on public about the plagiarism of my own work, no? And, I did request for an opportunity to talk to the author and his advisor as well.
Because there's also that thing of calling out a plagiarist in public, no? It might have so many implications also. I see Professor Barr is back in the room. Sir, what can you say about this case? Would you have done the same?
Thank you. Yeah, I just echo the conversation and the points that have been raised. It's quite an interesting aspect of when you're the judge, or when you're the bystander, the supervisor, the colleague who sees something going wrong. I mean, there's lots of things that happen, right? Lots of different emotions and feelings. Just wanted to say, interestingly, according to our Australian code for the responsible conduct of research, we have you sort of have an obligation and responsibility that you have to actually report it. You must raise these concerns. And that's actually quite a challenging, but it's a very challenging thing for researchers, for academics, for teachers, colleagues, peers, to actually really undertake. And so as the judge, I think you've got to say something. It's just as been discussed. What's the best way to raise it, and how do we get that information to the right people?
Yeah. So calling out is the option for Professor Barr. What? Dr. Mantaring?
I actually had, well, not exactly a similar experience, but while judging a research contest, I did a search of literature because it seemed very unlikely that the person who submitted the manuscript was the one who wrote the paper, only to find out that he was a co-author and that the first author was actually a foreigner. So that paper was already published, but it was still submitted to a research contest. And I was in a dilemma on how to address this, considering that it seems that his first author was the one who wrote his paper and not himself, but he was the second author of that published paper. Well, I did call the attention of the organizers, but he was still credited with having written the paper because we really don't know how many percent of the paper he had written, or etc. But that was a very sensitive situation.
So really, academic institutions should have stricter guidelines, no? This is just a contest. This is the scenario, but we can have the same scenario in another setting, no? Like presentations of students in classes. So my next question would be, can you comment on the practice of using a particular percentage that was brought up earlier, no? Let's say, for example, 30% similarity in deciding if a submission of a particular research or classwork is acceptable or not? Maybe you can have Professor Barr answer first.
Maybe Professor Barr, because as Dr. Cecil and I were discussing it earlier, maybe you want to listen to Professor Barr, Dr. Barr.
Thank you. Such wonderful presentations too. Thank you both very much. Turnitin themselves say there is no number. You know, when you get the experts in detection of similarity saying there's no such thing as a number that equals plagiarism, we should probably listen. And it's already been said very eloquently. This takes a human to really look at and think about, well, what does this number mean in terms of similarity? There's some interesting questions in the Q&A, and from experience and looking at different cases, some disciplines such as law studies, legal studies, and others, the percentages are actually often very high. And for those disciplines where there's a lot of overlap with other sources, it's perfectly acceptable. For other disciplines where what you write and what you say really matter, are really the crux of your research, the heart of it, the originality really does matter. So there is no magic number. There's probably a range of numbers for each discipline, but what those are, really, we don't know, and it will always end up being a person having to judge this, or a group of people.
Okay. Professor Cynthia, Professor Bautista?
No, it's okay. We're saying that there's no number.
Yeah.
That it's really a judgment call.
Okay, so...
I like what Dr. Daniel said, because the disciplines are also different.
Yes.
So the cultures and what are considered, I mean, there might be some way of harmonizing very general norms, but how they're operationalized would differ from one branch of knowledge to another. The scientists, of course, it's clearer. They have a hegemonic paradigm, so that it's easier for the scientists than it is for the social scientists or those in the applied social sciences.
So it's really hard to peg a particular percentage to say that this is acceptable as far as plagiarism is concerned.
Because you wouldn't like bin counting. You know, people just say, okay, it's 30%, then you get 30.5%, then you're already a plagiarist. I think that's what you also want to avoid.
I think you mentioned earlier the qualitative part, no, of plagiarism. No? So it's really hard to measure by numbers. Okay. So, Dr. Lazarte, do you want to add anything?
I think I said my piece a while ago. Sometimes you will be flagged by the checker that a certain, string of words look similar, but upon checking, it's like ordinary words that you can see, no, in common language that they look at, and then the publication that it's citing is a totally different topic, no. So it really needs the human brain to analyze each and every one. And sometimes the number may be small, but the plagiarism is actually of a greater degree, no? So it only caught the text, but in essence, some people get away with using the wrong grammar para hindi siya mahuli. No? I mean, may ganun kagaling na plagiarist. You can work around the system actually para hindi ka mahuli. So just relying on these checkers alone, the checkers are also as good as their databases.
Yes, yes.
So if they only contain journals from index journals, a lot of our local journals will not be on these databases. So hindi mo rin mahuhuli lahat. Baka yung peer reviewer pa ang makahuli kasi kilala niya, no, yung topic na yon and what are the local articles on that, no. So just using these checkers, we will call them similarity checkers rather than plagiarism checkers. They are a good tool, but it is not the end all and the be all. We still need our own analysis to check them if you will call it plagiarism or not.
So maybe I'd like to add, thank you, Cecil, for reminding me. I was a victim of such checking. It depends also on the quality of the checker. We used to have, when I was working with the Commission on Higher Education, one of the most controversial memorandum orders had to do with the shift to outcomes-based learning and all of that. So because there was a lot of resistance to that, and we were very generous with our PowerPoints. Everything came out. We didn't even PDF. They're all out because it was a public thing and public consultations. And so someone gave me a flag and gave me a certain document that says 40%, 47% of what we produce were plagiarized. And being the one writing, I got so scared that I will have to leave UP, I will have to leave CHED because what did I forget? Where did I forget quotation marks, etc.? Only to find out that the checker was a low-level checker, and that checker was actually checking our own documents that were out in online. So in a sense, we were plagiarizing ourselves. And the only problem was we cited a secondary source when we could have cited the first, but the secondary source we cited that was only problematic to me. It wasn't even a problem. But the anguish for someone who's told you plagiarized because they don't like the policy that is supposed to come out, that one, I mean, I'm on the other side. I've experienced that too.
Okay.
I have one last note.
Yes, Dr. Lazarte.
Although we rely on this similarity checkers, plagiarism of ideas may often not be detected.
Yeah.
No? So marami rin makakalusot doon kung checkers lang talaga.
So there is really human factor in this.
Yes.
Dr. Mantaring?
I just wanted to say, I don't think these checkers were meant to catch plagiarists. I correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lazarte, but I think these checkers are supposed to be used by the writers, the individuals, just to check themselves. So that if in case there's too much similarity between what you write and what's out there, then it really means that you need to rephrase or paraphrase or change or rewrite your own manuscripts. I don't know if that's a correct perception.
What I know is the use of the similarity checkers are both by publications, no, editors, yung mga authenticate, cross-ref, They were really meant to look at duplicate publication, similarity of words,
I see.
really for publication. No, so there are some checkers that are really meant for editors and publishers. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, I think that's the time we have for the first case. So just to summarize, all of our panelists will call out the plagiarists and probably perhaps will not reach the contest anymore. And with regard to plagiarism softwares or similarity softwares, it still needs the human factor, not just the checkers. Okay, so now I'll call on Kathy, Dr. Kathy Reyes, for the second case. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. We're running slight overtime, but I hope everyone won't mind. We're having a really interesting discussion that we'll try to end not very long, no, over time. Okay, I'll go to case number 2, which is actually very interesting in relation to the questions that we are having in the Q&A. We have a lot of students here, and I think they will relate to this case. So this is plagiarism in everyday writing, which is really a concern, not just among students, but I think for most of us who are writing. So this is a case borrowed online source, and we are citing it here. So a student, so this is the case, a student has a writing assignment for a history class, and her friend took this class last year. So this student asked for and receives a copy of the friend's paper, which she turns in as her own after making a few small tweaks. So to give you an idea, we'll show you the two portions of the text. Okay, so we have on the left side of your screen the original text, and the right side of the screen was what was submitted with a few alterations. So I think you get the idea of what happened here. Okay, we'll proceed with the questions, and we're happy that all of our panelists here are educators, so they could relate very well with our question. So we encounter plagiarism more often than we think, and as mentors and teachers of students who are writing, what are ways that you will pick up such behavior or such occurrence, and how meticulous should supervisors be or teachers be? May I ask Professor Barr to respond first?
Thank you. With academic items like this, we make a distinction between academic integrity, so the plagiarism in scholarly works and, in teaching, and then we have research integrity. We've made these distinctions between the two, but this is an area where we see overlap. It's a real challenge, I think, for all supervisors and mentors for, if you're teaching or if you're supervising research, how much monitoring, how much oversight should I be applying for a particular person, for a particular item? Or in this case, you must be looking at potentially hundreds of assignments. You would be looking at all sorts of things. And so that's where similarity detectors and software can certainly help you. I think it's actually a very interesting question then for research supervisors. When people are writing, or their students, or HDR students or postdocs are writing as well as doing work and showing you data that's often very, very polished, how often do you get to see the raw, how often do you get to see the original material? How often do you get to provide some oversight? I think it's a real big challenge. I don't really have a good answer except to say let's acknowledge the challenge and use things like similarity detectors where it's possible, but and think you have to think about, well, how do I get to provide the best oversight or supervision for a given situation when I can? How do I do that the best way?
Thank you, Professor Barr. Indeed, it is such a challenge, especially if you are supervising a lot of students, and also the work can be complex. So how about Dr. Mantaring? Do you have any comments?
Well, my comment is that I don't give assignments like this. That will require extensive comparison of what has been written before with what we expect our students to submit. So usually when I give a written or an essay assignment, I specify the number of words. So I make it very lean because we teach classes that are about 180, and I don't want to read 180 5-page manuscripts. I only want to read one paragraph per page per student. And I think by making the assignment simple enough, it removes the temptation to plagiarize. If they can give the assignment in bullets, that even might be better. And most of the questions I ask are pretty straightforward. So they're just keywords that I look for when I check these papers. And of course, these keywords can be common in all the submissions, and I don't consider that plagiarism.
Thank you, Dr. Mantaring. So here we also see the role of designing assessments and how we can ensure that the way we assess students, whether in research or other academic writing, we make it less conducive for them to copy work from other people. Dr. Lasarte?
We've probably seen some sort of copying, especially if you give the same assignments year after year. So one way of stopping this is change the assignment every year, every semester, para hindi magkopyahan. They have to think again for themselves what the answer is. Change your cases, to avoid this. The other thing siguro we should teach our students is how to paraphrase and to always cite. How to cite and to paraphrase, so that they will, if they do borrow something from another source, they will write it in their own words. They can practice that. You write it several times in your own words without looking at the original thing, and then from maybe 3 times that you write it, choose the best one. Maybe that's one way, and then make sure you reference this later on. Now ito, copying na talaga your seatmate, kasi former student who made the same thing, I think may problema talaga to. And if a student habitually does this is a big problem. If the same student, really does this as a usual thing, I think this would really be some consequences should be given for this. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Lasarte. I would actually dovetail to the next topic, and then we'll ask Dr. Bautista. You talked about paraphrasing, and this is really a skill that researchers and our students who are doing technical writing should master. What would be your advice for our students to develop this skill in an academic environment? So this goes for all the kind of writing that they are doing. We also receive a lot of questions actually on this, and I would assume these are from students. So what's your advice so that they will, I think, hone their skills in terms of paraphrasing properly and doing it correctly? Dr. Bautista.
I guess no, but it cannot be done in a single course. There's a technical writing course. I mean, for students, I think that because we're in a university and we're in a research university, I think that should be for everybody, that they go through a course like that. Then the other one is we're now moving slowly into more micro-credentials, etc. We can also have such programs where students can be advised, para kang guidance counselor, students will be advised, and then they get trained. Actually, if a teacher has a lot of time, the teacher can actually do that. So if you have the English teachers, they want very small classes because they continuously correct and give feedback to their students until they're able to write. But we cannot do that for the science classes, for instance. So one way of doing that is really, it's really having a program where you can send students. If you're in the US, they have programs where students can actually go and learn how to write or learn how to do. Parang meron silang support for students that are like that. But we should think about this more, I guess. This is plagiarism, but this is cheating, diba? This is academic integrity more than the publication stuff. And then maybe just a little comment about this. Yeah, it depends on the discipline. There are disciplines that require them to, this is legal or connected, policy or legal, that require them to write in this way because the argumentation is seen in the way they write. So that is also very disciplined. But what's wrong here is cheating to pass.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think that is really an experience. Usually, if your university have a constituency that are not native speakers of what is expected for them in terms of writing. I would like to move to my final question for this panel, and it is about setting parameters for discipline. We've discussed this briefly earlier, and Professor Barr, for instance, mentioned about an approach towards misconduct, but I would like to focus on students in particular. So how do universities set the parameters around discipline of students who are just starting to do research, they're starting to learn how to do technical writing or research writing? So what could we share with a lot of educators who are listening to us right now? Professor Barr?
Well, thank you. I'll be quite brief. I think it's absolutely fundamental and critical the institution provides as much support as possible so that the next generation can rapidly learn not only to be great researchers and academics, but sometimes the funny little conventions and nuances within disciplines. So, there's practices that are really important for furthering knowledge and making great positive impact. I think we should trust our students, of course. I think that's one thing too that's often sometimes missing, and I think sometimes we should really listen to them. Normally and typically, if you look at them as a group, they're probably the smartest group of people at a university. We should be actually asking them about what do they think, what do they see as solutions for all sorts of issues, and for example, in integrity and academic learning. But particularly about plagiarism, I really like the comments that have preceded this, and that's around. There's lots of ways we could support them. We could support them as an academic skills approach about their capability. You could use similarity tools for them to learn about academic norms and give them real counselling and support where they need it, and then trust them. And they typically turn out pretty okay. So there's some comments there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, the importance of putting that structure and making that also structure, create that structure together with our learners, our students. Dr. Bautista, may I ask about your perspective? I think also looking at how the UP system approaches.
Well, I cannot speak for the UP system now. I have to know what's going on. But I just know that once the student is already known or at least suspected of plagiarism, I guess there are two things. One is we're moving towards a more restorative justice kind of setup for the sanctioning of students. They get punished, but there's also restorative justice. But I cannot generalize. But the other one is it's important that you have a committee that hones itself, that looks at these things and understands better than the committee that you constitute specifically for a person. Because a committee that looks at different cases, they have a learning curve. Eventually, they are able to balance. They're able to balance the human, the restorative with the punishment, the sanctioning side, and also can understand the variations. Can operationalize Dr. Cecil's whatever flow chart better if it's consistent with the same committee. Because that's what we discovered. This is it's for graduation, for instance, all of those waivers that are made before students graduate. In the constituent universities where they have the same committee, usually the balance is more seen than in universities where the committee is not as consistent or changes all the time.
That's very important, no? The institutional learning, and that's I think something that our other institutions here can think about. Moving to Dr. Lasarte and then to Dr. Mantaring before we close.
I think I'm the youngest one here with the least experience in dealing with disciplining students. I think on the point of view, let's say, even for editors and journals, some of us don't have clear policies on what constitutes specific things that are unethical. So clear definitions, and then later on also some clear policies on what the penalties are. So aware dapat from the beginning rin, kunyari nasa student manual, no? Ano ba tong mga policies ng university? When I was studying in the University of London, it was very clear the plagiarism policy, no? What the policy was, and you had to sign, no, a document to say that all my assignments are not plagiarized, blah blah blah. For every assignment, may tinitik ka before you send it in. Also very aware ang student about these policies, no? So these are some practices siguro that we can adopt also.
Yeah. I don't disagree with any of the panelists, but it's very different, I guess, for students compared to scientists. When it comes to research integrity, we should uphold the highest standards of accountability to our scientists. So when does the student become now a scientist? I think when he pursues higher education, maybe master's or PhD, for example, and the residents and fellows are already, close to becoming subspecialists. So maybe we should have a different set of accountabilities depending on the level of educational attainment. Maybe we can be very lenient and be restorative, as Professor Bautista has said, for undergraduate students. But I think we should impose the high standards of accountability to the graduate students and to the residence fellows, and especially the faculty.
Thank you very much for everyone's very, very good input on this. And I think to summarize, our institutions, particularly who are listening in, it's very important to really understand what your institution will need. So are you working mostly with students, or as Dr. Bantaring said, also more scientists who are in graduate degrees? No? So because this will require, in a way, a gradient of mechanism to train and to inculcate the discipline of properly writing research papers and technical papers. So with this, I think we can close for the case, and I would like to call on Rufus and Dr. Wang for the next part of the program.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Ma'am Cathy. Thank you,
Kathy.
everybody.
Yep. Go ahead, Rufus.
Yeah, there was actually a very short time allotted to the very engaging discussions, but and then these were obviously not enough. But just the same, sir, we hope that our listeners were able to learn from our webinar this morning. So as we come to a close, we shall now call on Dr. Marilyn Balolong, member of the Committee on Research Integrity, at the same time Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Associate Dean for Research of the College of Arts and Sciences, to summarize what we should take home from today's webinar. Ma'am?
Thank you, Rufus. No, I'll be quick. I think pinipigilan ko yung lahat para makakain ng lunch, no? So I'll be quick. Of course, I'm very thankful for all our speakers and the guests for this morning. We had a very vibrant exchange of information through the talks, and we are thankful for our speakers for very relevant sharing this morning that are related to research integrity. Chancellor Carmencita Padilla, in her welcome remarks, emphasized the efforts of UP Manila administration to institutionalize conduct of research by UP Manila constituents. This is by way of Argao, Reb,
Ma'am Len?
importance
Yeah. Len, we
Ma'am Len,
lost
I
you.
think we lost you. Opo.
We lost you.
for
Just put off the video.
yeah.
We lost you.
I suggest put off the video.
Yeah. Len, off mo muna video mo.
I'll just turn off my video na lang po.
Yes,
Yes,
better,
yes.
Ma'am Len.
There you
Opo.
go.
Ayan,
Yes.
oo. Ayan. Okay, so and I finished Chancellor Padilla's talk, and then for the Dr. Edward Wang, he started his talk with a Lancet article, claiming the link between MMR vaccine, bowel disease, and even autism. This Lancet Lancet eventually retracted the article due to dishonesty and ethical treatment of patients, and have resulted to negative consequences, including measles outbreak due to the decrease in vaccination turnout. He also provided a difference between research integrity, which checks the conduct of research, and the researcher, while ethics focus on the protection of the research participant. Interestingly, he described the 9 pitfalls of research misconduct, or some of the factors that have been leading the scientists astray. So this includes temptation, rationalization, ambition, group and authority pressure, entitlement, deception, incrementalism, embarrassment, or even stupid systems. So he has also presented a timeline of the Committee of Research Integrity to become an ORI in the future, and emphasized the essence of RI education and monitoring in UP Manila and perhaps outside of it. So this webinar was born. So he ended his talk through a call of defining our boundaries as we explore frontiers. This talk was followed by Dr. Jacinto Blas Mantaring, although there was an exchange. No? So Dr. Mantaring discussed RI and differentiated it from research
Ma'am Len?
ethics. Discussed, yes. Yes.
You're okay. Okay na, Len.
Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Mantaring discussed research integrity and differentiated also from research ethics. He discussed the principles of responsible conduct of research, defined research misconduct, especially fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, and presented a picture showing the prevalence of plagiarism. He emphasized that RI focus on active adherence or personal convictions related to maintaining the credibility of researchers, while research ethics focused on protection of participants. He followed this presentation listing the practices that characterize responsible conduct of research, like honesty and fairness, accuracy and fairness, proficiency and fairness, collegiality, disclosure and conflict of interest, as well as protection of human subjects and humane care of animals in the conduct of research. This is in addition to the adherence to the mutual responsibilities of mentors and trainees, and practices being carried out from planning to conduct until dissemination. Likewise, Dr. Mantaring shared the elements of professionalism in science. He further described that this spectrum of research practices can go to ideal, which is linked to responsible conduct of research, and the fraudulent, which is linked to the research misconduct. He also noted the gray areas between, which is linked to the questionable research practices. He then presented some examples of plagiarism and prevalence for politics, to arts, to scientific research and emphasize plagiarism cases that can happen even in an academe such as UP. Dr. Daniel Barr, the Principal Research Integrity Advisor in Melbourne RMIT University, presented the Apec Guiding Principles for RI, followed this with describing how RI went during the COVID-19 pandemic, and ended by sharing ways to support research integrity. He started with describing why research integrity is important and supported it with listing the APEC guiding principles for research integrity, that is honesty, responsibility, rigor, transparency, respect, fairness, and diversity. These principles provide the foundations for various responsibilities like adherence to principle, reflect on how principles apply in their work, and support a culture of trustworthy and responsible research. Responsible research integrity during COVID, he described further as there was such flooding of research on coronavirus, and this swept websites and journals, particularly this year. Scientists raced through preprints or articles posted prior to peer review. We may have to think about how some, if not all of them, may have breached the principles of research integrity. Some important questions include: what are the needs for trustworthy research? How have research practices changed? Are the principles of RI unchanged during the pandemic? What challenges for ensuring RI? How might we better understand and solve these challenges? And can research integrity play a greater role in public trust of research? We need to check on the spectrum on the variation in translation of the principles of RI in research practice, from guided by principles to breach or serious breach of RI principles. Institutions should provide researchers so as to still align with principles for future research conduct, educations, and review. He ended his talk by an invitation for the 7th World Conference on Research Integrity to be held in Cape Town in 2022 and a virtual one in June of this year. Dr. Lazarte presented plagiarism in scientific publications and introduced the magnitude of the problems and plagiarism types. Magnitude of the problem, which is linked to retractions of data, includes only index journals, which she thinks may be underestimated. He also described some types of plagiarism, like plagiarism of ideas, plagiarism of text, which she calls copy-paste, which is most common, the self-plagiarism or the redundant data, collusion, patchwriting, which is different from paraphrasing. She further described the editing and review system where they can identify during the process if there will be issues related to plagiarism. She presented responsibilities of researchers or authors, peer reviewers and editors, or even the editorial office. She further presented a case on plagiarism in a review article. Overall, she mentioned that it is good to have a clear definition of plagiarism in the guide to authors. Interestingly, she presented ways on catching plagiarism during the editorial process and publication. She introduced the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, which is a UK-based organization which provides advice and guidance related to dealing with ethical issues in publication. She described the code of conduct for journal editors based on COPE when dealing with possible misconduct, supported by a flowchart when you suspect plagiarism in a submitted manuscript, or if a manuscript has already been published. She also enumerated possible penalties and ended her talk with a reminder that we should not be lazy or deceitful, but instead, we should be ethical and responsible. I think the best ending to all the talks that we had this morning were the reflections shared on research integrity and plagiarism by our VP Cinch, which includes the following relevant points. Most important is ensuring public trust. We also need to be vigilant nowadays due to rampant infodemic. Her reflections on post-truth realities versus science and rationality, meaning the fast spread of fake news, public are now being misinformed through social media, are related to constructed reality becoming the fact. Feelings now seem to matter more than the veracity of the facts. This needs to be addressed. She also described that as far as the AGA team is concerned, she shared the RI is the foundation's trust within the academic scientific community that enables its members to build each other's work. This is through the APRU. Furthermore, it's needed to help reassert the value of science in light of a global assault on the power of truth, knowledge, and science, and more importantly, help forge a science culture in developing society like the Philippines. So thank you very much. That was the summary of our conference for this morning.
Thank you, Ma'am Len. And as we come to a close, may we call on UP Manila's Vice Chancellor for Research, Dr. Armando Crisostomo, to deliver his closing remarks. PC Armand.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. What more can I say? It has been a very, not only interesting, it was informative, it was educational, and hopefully this becomes a tipping point for many of our researchers and educators who tuned in. I'm sure it was beneficial to everybody. The problem of maintaining high standards of behavior in everything that we do, whether in research and in all our professional activities, should be paramount. There is a temptation, of course, because of the emergency situation that we are in now, particularly in this pandemic. Many of us may get tempted to take shortcuts in our various forms of our work. But I think this session will really instruct us that our professional standards should never be compromised in all the kinds of work that we do, whether educational, in research, in the services that we extend to our people, and in whatever we write or disseminate for information to others. So again, thank you to all the participants, the panelists, the resource persons, and my congratulations to the Committee on Research Integrity, headed by Professor Edward Wang, and all your committee members for this remarkable endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, VC Armand Crisostomo. So this brings us to an end of a very interesting webinar. Everyone learned a lot. We learned a lot. And as we always say, this is a continuing learning opportunity for all of us to make everything better for our researchers, our students, and for society in general. So we close this webinar by posting this call for to watch out for our coming webinars. As we said, this is a quarterly webinar that we will be initiating for 2021. So each webinar will talk about research integrity in general, and it will focus